We have quorum. If everyone would take their seats, we'll get underway. So welcome to the 11th meeting in 2019 of the Public Works Committee of the City of Hamilton. And I'd like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly and or visually recording this meeting. All electronic devices are to be switched to non-audible function during the committee meeting. So, Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there are changes to the agenda. We have two added delegation requests. Item 6.1 for today's meeting is Ian Borsuk from Environmental Hamilton, respecting item 10.1. And item 6.2, Jamie Stuckless from Share the Road Cycling Coalition, which is for a future meeting. It's my recommendation that both delegations respecting item 10.1, which is the Ancaster Memorial Arts and Culture Center, be heard first when the committee reaches the public hearings delegation section of the agenda, and that the staff report then be considered immediately following these delegations. We also have a withdrawn private and confidential report, item 14.2, respecting waste collection service contract. Please also note that item 7.1, which is the interview subcommittee to the Public Works Committee minutes from August 12th, and item 14.1, which is a confidential appointment to the Keep Hamilton Clean and Green Committee, have been distributed and are before you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Can I have a mover and a seconder then to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Whitehead, seconded by Pearson. All in favor, it's an electronic vote. That carries, and a vote of 9-0. Is there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes of July 10th? Moved by Pearson, seconded by Jackson. All in favor, electronic vote. That carries on a vote of 10-0. We'll move on to delegation requests. I need a mover and a seconder to approve the delegations listed. Let me finish first, then I'll come to you. Listed as items 6.1 and 6.2, which is Ian Borsuk of Environment Hamilton and Jamie Stuckless of Share the Road Committee. Moved by Whitehead, seconded by Vanderbeek. Discussion on it? Seeing none, all in favor, electronic vote. That carries. Item 7 is a consent item, which is an interview subcommittee to the Public Works. And so can I have a mover and a seconder to receive this item? Just all in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Let's move on then to public hearings and delegations. As approved in the changes to the agenda, we will hear from two delegates in attendance to speak to item 10.1, the Ancaster Memorial Arts and Cultural Center. First, following which time we will consider the staff report. So at this time, I'd like to call upon Robert Wilkins, Ancaster Society for the Performing Arts, to delegate respecting item 10.1, Ancaster Memorial Arts and Culture Center. So, Mr. Wilkins, I see you've made it to the podium already, so welcome, and the podium is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can everybody hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay, and thank you, committee members and staff members, for allowing us to come and speak to you today. I must tell you, first of all, my CV is included there, but I want to talk about this a little bit because this is all about the City of Hamilton. You'll see in my CV that I was on the Victorian Order of Nurses Board for 6 years, representing Hamilton Dundas branch. I was the National Governor for Canada, representing Hamilton. I've been on the Bay Area Health Trust Board of Directors for 10 years. Bay Area Health Trust is the entrepreneur arm of the hospital, as you know, and I worked on assembling the parking garage land on Concession Street and Victoria Street and dividing up the Shadoka lands. The last time I was here, visited you, I was on the board of directors at Dundas Valley School of Art. I was on the building committee and the fundraising committee, and I came to make the ask for the money to renovate DVSA in Dundas. Finally, so you know that this is about Hamilton, my last job, I was a lawyer in private practice. I was managing partner of the Hamilton office of Gowlings. And my last job there was to I was on National Executive Committee too, is to talk my national partners into giving me $3 million to renovate the bank building in the corner of Main and James, okay? This today, This is all about, this is going to be a jewel in the crown of the city of Hamilton. This is Does my 5 minutes include the applause? I want to let you know, when we talk about it being that important for so many arts groups, and I'm so thankful Boris is here today because Boris also recognized the need for this kind of facility for the city of Hamilton. Now, I'm a little anxious this morning, obviously, because we've been working on this for 5 years. How can I express to you in 5 minutes the excitement, the inspiration, what I've learned about the arts community? I can't, but I'll do my best. I'm also anxious because how do I properly bring to justice all the effort that these arts groups have done over the last 35 years in wanting the opportunity to grow? How can I express to you in 5 minutes? I can't very much. But the fact is that these organizations have made a huge difference to the quality of life of Ancaster. Think about the young children that get to learn new skill sets, they get to dance, to sing, they get to play instruments. Think about them. They may not go on to do that, but they're going to inspire, to have the confidence in their life to be able to be accomplished people. And the number of people that are participants, I'm going to give you some numbers, are huge. This improves the quality of their life. It gives them a social outlet, huge other benefits in the quality of their life. And finally, the people that come to watch the shows, wow, they're fabulous shows. They just really enjoy it. So again, it adds to the quality of life. So what I really want to do is, in my short period of time, I gotta give you some statistics so you know a little bit. I won't give you them all because there's so many, but Theatre Ancaster, and it's in operation for 30 years. There's been 5,000 participants. Those are people that are actors, singers, set makers, etc., or orchestra. 5,000. How many people have attended the shows? 180,000 people have attended the shows. Hamilton Film Fest, 15 years, 200 volunteers. They've had 75,000 people attend the shows. Hamilton All-Star Jazz Band, Russ Will, what a savior. 35 years he's been having the 3 levels of jazz band. 35 years. He's had trained over 500 people to play instruments, and some of them are charitable in terms of bringing people that can't afford to do it otherwise. And he's had 75,000 people attend his shows. I can go on and on. Ancaster Society of Performing Arts, music at Fieldcoat. We've been doing that for 25 years. 1,700 volunteers due to the different things, parking, etc. There's been over 70,000 visitors watching those shows. So over the last 35 years, these people, these organizations have earned the opportunity to grow. They've earned it. This is not overnight. They've earned the opportunity to grow. And what does that mean? Well, I'll give you an example of what that means for Theatre Ancaster. In the summer, they have performing art lessons for children. You register online. They only limit it to 400 kids. It sells out in 11 minutes. With this new facility, they'll be able to double that number. They'll be able to double the number. Okay? Now let me talk about a little bit where the participants reside and where the patrons come from, okay? I'm going to take the best example I can. Chicago is one of the last bigger shows that Theatre Ancaster had. There are 80 participants. That means actors, orchestra, set builders, ticket sellers. 80 volunteer participants are participants. And how many people where did those people come from? 35% of them came from actually Ancaster proper, the rest from the rest of the city. The rest of the city. Now let's talk about the patrons for that show. 4,104 tickets were sold for that show. 52% of those people came from all the wards in the city other than Ancaster. 29% came from Ancaster, and the balance of 20% were from outside of the city. What a nice cultural economic driver that is. So I must say to you that I'm going to, and the last thing I can say before I run out of time is, this plan has been worked out in extreme detail. And how, again, can I tell you about the detail in this period of time? But I'll give you one little fact.
Just 1 second, Bob. Members of the committee, is passed the 5-minute extension. I moved by Farr, seconded by Jackson. All in favor? Okay, you're more
Maybe
time,
another
Bob.
minute or two at most, okay?
Electronic vote on
I
that?
want to give you one example.
Just
that
1 second, Bob. The clerk wants an electronic vote on the extension of time. That carries 11-0, so go ahead.
Okay. Attention to detail. How can I tell you about every aspect of the attention to detail to make this sustainable and effective? Well, I'm going to give you one little exciting thing to tell you. that this kind of thought's gone in it. The Rotary AM Club gave us $100,000 for the Rotary Inspirational Wall. What's that? Well, the Rotary Club, one of their mandates is to inspire young people to work really hard, and you can achieve whatever goals you can. And if you're successful, you should give back to the community. The Rotary Inspirational Wall will have the names of the people who bought naming rights on the wall, and it will tell their story. I'll give you a little story. John and Ellie Vortman were on my paper route in Ancaster. And John ended up buying a stable in Carluke, and he ended up boarding horses, and then he ended up baking and taking them to the driveway, and ended up being Oak Run Farm Bakery, you know, a $100 million operation employing 400 people. They gave me $250 to name the small performing art hall Vortman Hall. And wasn't their story? Where do we record stories, wonderful stories of hardworking couples? Where do you record that? And that they've worked that hard to be that successful, and they're giving back to the community. Every one of those names on that wall is clean. They're clean from people in Hamilton, Ancaster, that have wonderful people, and it's intended to be that inspiration. This is the kind of attention to detail that's gone into every aspect of this. This will be hugely successful for the city of Hamilton. I'm here today to ask you for your support for all of these groups. It's a wonderful project. We've got to get it started. We got to get it started today. We don't want cost overruns. We've got to get it started. They deserve it. We need it today. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Bob. And for the committee members, Colin Lapsley is also here, who is the Executive Director of the Ancaster Center for Performing Arts. So any questions you have, you can direct them to Bob or to Colin, who's available to my right. So, Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Wilkins, nice to meet you. And I just want to say right up front, I thought the Ferguson family was one of the most influential in Ancaster, but before you arrived today, I was whispered by a few Ancasterites that Wilkins guy is even more influential than the Ferguson family. Anyways, Mr. Chairman, through you to Bob. Bob, how about thanks for your excellent advocacy for the center. How about a quick recap for committee in terms of the financial component? How much has been raised by the community, and what is the overall global budget, and what is the gap, please? Mr. Chairman, through you to Bob, please.
Okay, and read the budget. I think the staff report is very thorough in terms of where we are now with the numbers, including what the tender is. I can say I'm public fundraising chair. I can say our original goal was $3 million, and we're basically at $5 million.
Wow.
And from the community. And I wish I could say it was, we only had to get 10 people to give the money, but we have significant donors. But the number of people that actually gave money and participated was huge.
I think it's important for public consumption. Bob, whatever you wish to share, please.
Well, so if I was to say to you, this is my 6th list of call people. Okay, this is my 6th. Okay, this is my current list. Okay? Okay?
This is everyday people
There's
that
a
have
lot of
donated.
people participating here. A lot of people want this, okay? And there is that need, and I hope the numbers tell you that. So from the public fundraising, we're $5 million. Am I giving up on that? No. I want to have some money safe money to start, so Colin can start operating. Am I giving up on chasing the feds in the province and Colin? No. We've already been to Queen's Park again. We met with Minister of Infrastructure. Are we giving up? This is proposed that we funded to get going now, but does it mean we're not going to start, we're going to stop and trying to get some of that money back for you? No. We're going to keep going on it. We're committed to that, and we've been doing that. We've been to Ottawa, Cultural Spaces, Colin and I. We've been to Toronto more than once. So we're committed, and the $5 million is there, and I'm really proud of the community for, that tells you that they really want it, doesn't it? It tells you, sorry.
Oh, thank you, Bob. I just felt for public consumption it was important to reiterate what your original target was. You said $3 million. Your community and donors have far exceeded that to $5 million. And without getting into the politics of it, Mr. Chairman, through you to Bob, we're in this somewhat conundrum, if you will, because of an unfortunate announcement recently that has brought you to this table. Is that fair to say, Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Wilkins?
Yes, Mr. Jack. It's been very painful. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Bob. And Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, we'll deal with the item and fully supportive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Oh, yeah, I had two speakers, and they've gone down. Jump, JP, you still want to speak, or you're good? So it sounds like everybody understood you very clearly, Bob. Thank you for your presentation. We did ask Bob to raise $3 million, and he didn't do that. He raised $5 million. And so the community is very, very supportive of this. And Colin has all the statistics on who's attended and where they attended from. So I need a motion to receive the presentation then. Moved by Collins, seconded by Esther Pauls. All in favor? As carried. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And the next delegation is Ian Borsick from Environment Hamilton, respecting the Ancaster Memorial Arts Center. Ian, are you here? Welcome. So the podium is yours, and you too have 5 minutes.
Hey, committee. Thank you so much for receiving my delegation request today. Submitted some questions beforehand that I'm just not going to necessarily go through entirely. Right off the bat, I do want to say entirely that I'm not here to protest or speak against the recommendations from staff. But from the perspective of Environment Hamilton, as some of you around the Horseshoe have known, we have raised concerns about federal gas tax dollars and how that's been allocated in years past. And while we're certainly very pleased to see federal gas tax dollars going towards something that isn't road work, going forward, we would like to see some more transparency on how the remainder of the federal gas tax dollars for this remaining year is going to be used and spent. So while we're completely supportive of arts and culture, and in this specific instance, I think it's a fantastic use of funds, going forward for the remainder of the funds for the federal gas tax levy that's left over, also considering that we did declare a climate emergency, and also considering that the province did also renege on their commitment to increasing their provincial gas tax transfers, we at Environment Hamilton really just like to flag the federal gas tax dollars that were allocated for this project and use that as a means of saying, hey, listen, let's use this as a precedent to talk about how we can use the rest of the federal gas tax dollars transferred for this year for things other than road work, for things that can help us address climate emergency, and for things that can do other things other than, as I said, road work. I'm just going to leave it at that. I just wanted to flag that for the committee, and at Environment Hamilton, we just wanted to flag that as well for the transparency issues of having the federal gas tax dollars being recommended by staff. But again, we're supportive of federal gas tax dollars going to arts and culture, but going forward, we would like to see a more transparent process on how the remainder of those funds will be spent.
Okay, thanks, Ian. We have a question, Councillor Whitehead.
I find it ironic that the cars and people driving cars are paying significant taxes on gas. They're contributing to these gas taxes. And often they need roads to drive on, same with cyclists. And you're advocating not to spend federal gas tax, which is generated by vehicles which put and pound the roads, not to put it back into the roads. I just find that a bit odd.
So is it odd that the provincial gas tax dollars are specifically allocated for transit then?
No, I'm finding it
So when
odd.
you look at the federal gas
Your
tax dollars
comments,
allocation,
I'm not here to
uses-
debate it.
It's arts and recreation, it
The
can
comment
be
that was
used for-
made, the comment that was made, it shouldn't go to roads. That's your comment, not mine. I'm just challenging that component. So I'm not driving into provincial tax. You made a comment that gas tax shouldn't be spent on roads. I'm trying to understand and ascertain that the reason why you have that money is because of the roads, and the roads are what drives the gas tax. Without roads, you don't have cars. Without cars, you don't have gas tax, correct? So you're generating gas
I'm just
tax to
concerned,
fix.
Councillor, we're drifting off the issue that was before us today, and I appreciate the fact you don't want to debate this today.
No, I just find it ironic, Mr. Chair, that someone would come forward and say, don't spend gas tax on roads. Thank you.
I don't want to get into debate on that issue because it's off topic of what you registered as a delegate for. So Councillor Nan.
Thank you, Ian, for coming in today and raising the point. In GIC, we had another delegate come forward, kind of looking at what has this council done in terms of making decisions that speak towards how we are integrating the climate emergency declaration into our decisions moving forward as a council body. And I think you raised a really good point about how we're using all those funds, what we're using it to in terms of supporting historically under-resourced capital projects that support arts or very specifically target some of the environmental issues that we're facing as a city. So I appreciate you coming in, especially as we are moving towards a 2020 budget deliberation. I think you're raising a very important point for all of us to consider around this table about how we're integrating a climate lens to our financial choices. Thank you.
Okay, I have no more questioners, so I'll kind of have a motion to receive the delegation. Moved by Pearson, seconded by Danko. All in favor? That's carried. Now, in accordance with the changes to the agenda, I'm going to move on now to 10.1, which is the Ancaster Memorial Arts Center staff report. And because this is in my ward and because I'm very involved, I'm going to relinquish the chair to Councillor Danko, who's the vice chair. So I'll turn the chair over to you. And if I can, Mr. Chair, I want to put myself on the speakers list just to introduce it.
Certainly, go ahead.
Thank you. So I want to start out by giving a big thank you to Bob Wilkins and Colin Lapsley for the incredible support. And it's not easy raising $5 million, but it's certainly a signal of the support from the community. I think the gallery today also sends a clear message about the support in the community for this facility. I first got engaged in it in 2012, so I've been involved in it 7 years. I think a number of you are tired of me talking about it with you. I know I've talked to you offline many times about this was coming, and we've had our issues with this project. It's been a tough one, and I'll go into that in a few minutes. Before 2012, I attended a number of sold-out productions of Theatre Ancaster. I was amazed by the local talent. So I ended up meeting formally with the Ancaster Arts community in 2012 and listened to what they were looking for, which is an arts center. And I was pretty clear with them at that time that without community support, this couldn't happen. Well, Bob Wilkins and Colin Lapsley at that meeting agreed to raise $3 million. And our funding strategy at the time was to get 12 million because that was the quote given to us at a very large public meeting that was standing room only at the Old Town Hall in 2014. So Bob and Colin agreed at that time to meet 1/4 of the funding needs and raise $3 million. Well, I can tell you they didn't do that. They raised $5 million. So each year, Theatre Ancaster does a training program for students who show interest in the arts. And as Bob said, they sell out in 15 minutes. That was another defining issue for me to come on site and support this project. And a number of them do come up from inner city schools. The project, I'm going to admit, has been a tough journey. Early on, after the architect went public with us on the $12 million budget, they found an error in their estimate where they missed two major things and sent the cost north by $5 million. Next, after a public announcement from the parliamentary assistant to the Premier in October 2017, cabinet approval, Treasury Board approval, and going on to be included in the 2018 budget, the commitment from the province for $3 million towards the project. In the spring of this year, the new government pulled that funding. And that was a major blow to us, as Councillor Jackson pointed out in his questions to Bob. A third item that we bumped into is I call them the shocks, was the bid cost. They come in $2.4 million over budget, and we paid the money, our facility staff paid the money early on to get a Class 1 estimate on us. And that Class 1 estimate was refreshed this spring before it went out to bid, and it still came in $2.4 million over budget. We had to do an archaeological according to the rezoning, and the rezoning is all finished. It's all ready to go. We have a low bid contractor now. If this gets approved today, we'll be awarding the contract and getting started very shortly. But a requirement of the rezoning was we had to do an archaeological dig. And I have trouble with this whole archaeological thing, and it's discussion for another day, but we retained an archaeologist to go in and do a Class 1, which was about $50,000 to $100,000. They got in there and they said, well, now you need a phase 2. Well, then you need a phase 3, and then you need a phase 4. So they virtually writing themselves their own checks. But we ended up spending $1.2 million in archaeological by the time it was finished, which was another major blow to us in trying to find the funding to get this thing across the finish line. So there's 4 very major things, plus there were some other smaller hits. Just for committee's information, the tender for this project went out in June, but it was deferred until mid-July for the closing until after council dealt with Bill 66. And after council agreed not to opt out of Bill 66, the 6 bidders were all advised that they no longer had to be signatory to the Carpenters Union. So it wasn't something that inflated the price because they were well aware of that. I was a little disappointed. We, after the experience in the Greg Meyer Arena, we went to a pre-qualification system and shortlisted 6 contractors, the staff did, but only 3 submitted. It's just the construction industry. Ancaster is putting in $11.5 million into this, from obviously $5 million from the community for $4.6 million in area rating. In addition to that, we've sold some properties in Ancaster, city properties that were in Ancaster, and the previous council resolution said that they could go to the Arts Center. But the big one there was $1.2 million to sell part of the Arts Center site that wasn't required for this development. We have a firm sale on that, and once services go in, that'll close and the money will flow. We're also selling the Carluke Community Center. It wasn't popular in Carluke to sell that, but it was for the better community good, and so that's underway for the sale. Federal government is in for $1.5 million, and quite frankly, it's very likely they'll come in for another 1.2. You can ask Robin those questions, but she sent me a very positive email last week that it looks very promising, but we have to get moving with the project. So if we get that $1.2 million, which they won't provide until we have an awarded contract, so it's a double-edged sword here. You got to award the contract before you can get that funding. That will be split 3 ways between the 3 special asks today in the staff report, which is the gas tax, the unallocated capital reserve, and the Ancaster reserve. So 1.2 would be 400,000 would be credited to those 3 accounts when we get that funding. I want to close by thanking facility staff, particularly Rome D'Angelo and Robin Boyce. Robin, got your last name wrong here, Robin, sorry. But they've been working with me, and I got a little tired of the bad news that was always coming, but we got through it, and I especially want to give a shout out to our finance staff, particularly Mike Zagaric and Brian, who's here today, to answer any questions, Brian McMullen, on the financial side. I know Cindy and Joe also participated heavily from finance on sorting out how to get this project back on track, and they're very helpful in doing it. This has been the toughest project in my political career over the last 13 years, but it's also by far one with the most community support. So I respectfully ask for your support, and at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, come back to me, and I'll be happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you. And we have a speakers list. First is Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chair. First of all, I want to say from it's great to see the community come and rise to the occasion and demonstrate their commitment and dedication and hard work to raise the money. That's important, but I've never been so impressed in the work that the ward councillor has done in the context of trying to mitigate the impact on the city taxpayers by trying to get as many partners involved in this funding as practical. And that's what we should all do. I mean, we need to mitigate the impact directly on our taxpayers and look at every opportunity. And one thing I'll always give credit, where credit is due, is Lloyd is very good at that. And people should recognize that as part of his strength. It's a sort of unique situation because I'm working on area rating issues right now. For example, in Ward 14, part of the ward has a capital area rating that I can use for roads and upgrades and so forth. I think it's about 1.2 million, if I recall. But the other part, the scenic woods component, I can't. They can't tap into those dollars. And so I was looking at a way to enable or empower Ancaster to be able to power into that area rating piece. But I think I got a solution because I'm looking at this, and apparently there's capital reserve in Ancaster that I can tap into that I wasn't aware of. So this has been a useful exercise. And it'll help offset that differential because we're working on the scenic component on pathway urbanization. So there might be an opportunity to work with the good councillor from Ancaster on that. So part of the request here is to area rate further Ancaster. So to Ryan here, or who's from finance? So, hi, Brian. How are you doing?
Fine, Counselor.
So I've been working on this area rating for policies for a long time, and I've been told on many, many occasions that currently under the Municipal Act, we can only area rate based on the former communities. So the old City of Hamilton, Stoney Creek, Ancaster, is that still the case?
So through the chair, yes.
So in here is proposing some area rating for Ancaster, which means now that because of the change in the boundaries, that in fact it would impact residents I currently represent. Is that correct?
So through the chair, yeah, this proposal affects Ancaster, former Ancaster residents. So it affects residents in both of the wards that have Ancaster residents.
Right. So the fact that I represent this group and say no, that actually could mess up this $2.7 million contribution. Is that correct?
So through the chair, the process is, requires all of or support from all of members of council.
So I just want to highlight that I've never been in such a position, and I want to exercise it in a very positive way. And in the context of what I just talked about in regards to the good work of the ward councillor and certainly the community and how it's being demonstrated, and I did talk to the good councillor this morning about doing a joint letter, because I normally consult with the community before impacting with tax increases to explain what we're doing. The fact is we're actually approving this before I've had that opportunity to do so. But I have the commitment from the good Ancaster councillor to work with me on a letter explaining the benefits of this area rating contribution for this great project. So I look forward to working on the letter with the ward councillor. I will be supporting this project. That's because of the amount of work that's been demonstrated over a number of years. When you see that kind of work, how can you not support it? Thank you.
Thank you. And next on the speakers list, we have Councillor Farr.
I'll just wait for Terry's applause to die down. And we don't always align, Frugal Fergie, politically. You're a little bit country, I'm a little bit rock and roll. But this one's pretty easy, and I just wanted to highlight what was already alluded to by the previous speaker. I'm sure others, you have already eloquently thanked all the people here and the hundreds and hundreds that you've been working with since 2012, and I think and appreciate that, and I'm sure they do too. But for yourself, when the province not too long ago pulled that funding, we've had many occasions to speak about that. After a few days of woefulness, it wasn't like pulling the plug on the project. It just seemed to make you stronger and give you more resolve. And that's the kind of character you are. And I think your constituents clearly know that and appreciate that. But it needs to be said here at this table. You really, really have been working hard on this one. But it's to me indicative of your approach to local politics, and especially Ancaster. So I talked to Boris Brott. He assures me that once the Art Center is through in Ancaster, the good people of Ancaster will still continue to visit downtown now and again for artsy things. So I appreciate his attendance and that reaction, because that could have been the breaking point for me here today on this vote. And I would appreciate, in turn, every now and again, you give me the pass to go to Ancaster once this thing is done, so I could visit some of the shows there. Congratulations. Good work, everybody.
Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you. Boy, it's fast to follow that one. Anyway, I just want to say that thanks to Bob Wilkins for his presentation. You know, he mentioned the quality of life in Ancaster, that this kind of small community arts and culture, we'll call it, brings to town, but really, it brings it to the entire city. It really does. It makes our entire city richer. And you know, I want to say that this is an outstanding example of the kinds of partnerships that happen in this city and in the small communities that are part of the city. And, you know, it's, to me, it reiterates that this is what small, tight-knit communities do. That's what they do. They come to the fore and they support the things that are really important to them. And you know, this city as a whole is full of small communities. It is full of small communities. And this is such a good example of that. And it's a lot of money, and it's been a lot of work. And I don't see any reason at all why we shouldn't be supporting that and recognizing it. And I think that it would behoove us all to show up there when this is finished and enjoy some of the things that go on at that Ancaster, in that Ancaster community, and support them in a very real way. And when they have a goal of $3 million and they come up with $5 million, that's a lot of money from the community. And for a project, that's a lot of money. So I am happy and very supportive of what's happening here today, and glad that I can support the recommendations that are going forward. So thank you.
Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Chairman. And Councillor Ferguson, when this memorial school, I believe, was declared surplus about 6-7 years ago, we were a couple of the colleagues on council that were around then. He immediately arranged a site visit for me to take me to the site and to show me exactly what his vision had been for hopefully converting and repurposing the memorial school site. And that was about 6, 7, 8 years ago. And that's how passionate it was, Chairman Ferguson, for you back then. And you've maintained the vision. And, you know, so many opportunities come and go. And I love this great city of Hamilton. So many districts and parts of our city have so many different things to offer. And when a community group brings forward dollars, I don't care if it's a few dollars to help for the new neighborhood playground, or whether it's for something of the magnitude of this arts and cultural center to be, you know, we have to listen very carefully, Deputy Chairman Danko, that groups that have done all this volunteer fundraising, instead of just coming to the city of Hamilton and saying, please, we need this, we need it from you in its entirety. When groups do the effort that they've done at the grassroots level and bring tangible results to the table, I have always been open-minded. My ears are very wide open, and I say we need to find a way to partner and possibly support, to whatever degree we can, to make that project a reality. And so this is a living example of this. I know for you, Chairman Ferguson, and your community, especially for you and your family, I sense this is a legacy project for you. Money to the table, no impact on the general levy, very important for the rest of us that represent taxpayers across the city, repurposing an old site. It's come together nicely, and with Mr. Wilkins' still commitment that they're not stopping today, Mr. Deputy Chairman, that they're going to continue to pursue other opportunities if it's viable, but if it's not, at least they hopefully after today's decision will have the security of the city's support and financing package moving forward. So you've got my blessing for it as well today. Thank you very much.
And Councillor Pearson, and then I'm going to put myself on the speakers list.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chair, and certainly a lot has been said, so I'll try not to reiterate it, but I'm certainly thrilled to support this. And I commend Councillor Ferguson for the amount of work, and Kathy in your office that have you put into this, and certainly Bob and Boris, everyone here, you deserve a round of applause. I think it's wonderful. We all know we don't like to use the A word, but amalgamation, since amalgamation, I think we've all tried as outlying communities to be sure that we maintain our identities and maintain the services and maintain the needs and wants of our independent, our individual communities. And I think this continues this, especially for Ancaster, and it's very, very important. I certainly support, and I'm pleased, I want to mention as well that Councillor Whitehead is on board, that agrees that this is something that should go forward. And I'm certainly looking forward to the great news of the doors opening and I'm sure a stupendous event being scheduled. So Councillor, again, commend you as Chair, Councillor Ferguson, and certainly the wonderful, wonderful involvement of all of the community. It certainly speaks volumes for how hard you work and how hard and how passionate this community is about their community. So thank you.
And I'm just going to pass the chair to Councillor Jackson. I have 3 questions for staff. So just 3 questions for staff from me here. So as one of the board of directors for the Art Gallery of Hamilton, also on the Arts Advisory Committee, very supportive of arts in our city, and it's great to see the support that the arts has in Ancaster and citywide. So this is, from what I understand, is a dearly needed project for the city. I've been to the fire hall for a number of shows, and looking forward to an expansion of the arts in the city. On the financing, question to Mr. McMullen. The original budget was $14.4 million. If I subtract out the federal subsidy, the provincial subsidy, and the community contribution, that leaves the city's contribution of $5.4 million. And then if I do the same thing with the new budget, which is $22 million and change, if I subtract out the federal subsidy and the community contribution, that leaves us with $15.5 million. So essentially, the city's contribution is going from $5.4 million to $15.5 million. Is that more or less correct?
Yeah, so through the chair, yeah, that's more or less correct, yes.
So there's, out of the funding sources, there's two line items here that raise some concern. So the first one is obviously the loss of the provincial subsidy of $3 million. On a project that's citywide important, that the federal government has come to the table for, that it looks like the federal government is going to be even providing additional funds, it would be really nice to see the provincial government at least match the federal's contribution. So I know Mr. Wilkins had some discussion that they are having further talks with the province. Has the city been involved at all with further talks with the province along those lines?
So through the chair, with this specific project, and not directly at this time right now, there was the bilateral agreement signed between the federal government and the provincial government back in 2018 related to the Investing in Canada infrastructure program. So through that intake process, we're looking for a program from the province on the cultural and recreation type infrastructure. That has not been announced yet. Recently there was, and you're going to be getting a report soon on the public transit program that was announced back in July.
So if I'm reading into your answer there, that there is a possibility of a provincial subsidy with maybe some pressure from the Ancaster community as well. We've seen some movement with this provincial government. When the public has got involved, they've reversed some of their previous decisions. So is that a possibility in the realm of possibility?
So through the chair, so regarding a specific intake program, the challenge with some of those programs in some cases is that they don't allow, if projects have started already, or they don't allow expenditures that have already begun. Regarding specific conversations between elected officials within the city council and the province, I'm not involved in those conversations.
Just to interrupt for 1 second, I just was asked a question. I think it's a good question. Councillor Danko, you're the chair. Have you relinquished the chair to ask these questions?
Yes, to Councillor Jackson.
You give it to Councillor Jackson because I didn't pick up on that, and Councillor Jackson didn't hear it either.
There was some applause. I might have drowned it out.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
Carry on, Councillor Danko.
Thank you. So on the question of the federal gas tax funding, is there, through you, Mr. Acting Chair, To Mr. McMullen, is there some guidelines on what the federal gas tax funding is invested in, and what leeway does the city have to invest in something that's not specifically related to transportation?
Finance Director McMullen, please.
Yeah, so through the chair, yeah. So the federal gas tax program has been in existence since 2005, and the rules and guidelines have changed over the years. So in 2010, specifically, large municipalities had to specifically invest the funds in transit and roads categories. In the latest renewal back in 2014, they expanded that to 17 different categories of assets. I'll refer to them as, and I can rhyme those off if you'd like. So, but in the case of the decisions that we make on a regular basis through our capital budget process, we've aligned federal gas tax funding to transit and to roads. And roads category generally includes bridges. And so just for your information as well, so we get about $33 million now on an annual basis. We had the one-time top-up of $33 million recently that we utilized to offset the cost of the disaster mitigation and adaptation fund projects that were announced. You can't stack federal monies on top of each other, so we couldn't have applied our share of the DMAF funding. We couldn't use federal gas tax for that project, so what we did is we changed the financing plan from the 2019 budget and used that $18 million and changed it to a contribution from the operating budget.
And just on the gas tax side, there was mentioned by the delegate as well that the province had previously committed to doubling of the gas tax. And the current status of that is that's off the table, is that correct?
Right, so through the chair, the previous government had a plan that they were going to be doubling the provincial gas tax, which we use for transit, and then that is not happening within the new budget in March of 2019. Sorry.
Thank you, Director. Councillor?
Last question, this will be for Director D'Angelo. In the alternatives for consideration, one of the options would be to reduce the size of the building, the scale of the development, which is recommended against. And when I go back to one of the original consultants' reports, there's two options. There's an option A and an option B. The option A being a renovation, and I believe the option B being more of a new build with some reno of the existing school, with a pretty significant cost difference. So the renovation option was about $3 million less. So now that we have a significant cost increase to the city taxpayers, can you give me some background on why it would not be recommended to reduce the scope of the project and possibly retender with a reduced scope to meet the original budget?
Facilities Director D'Angelo, please.
Through the chair, I'll attempt to answer that question, and I'm going to use Robin to assist me on the answer there. Through the beginning, the mandate was always to provide a 450-seat facility. We looked at the new facility plus renovating the school, and the cost of the renovating the school was pretty high, so we looked at value engineering the entire project. There was a lot of exclusions in the renovation of the school, and we put the investment more into the addition, the new part of the facility. So as I stated, we did a number of exercises, valued engineered, and we came to the conclusion that we have today. I'm going to defer the question also to Robin so she can add to that answer.
Thanks, Director. Manager Robin Ellis.
So through the chair, just a quick clarification that the option A was the, pardon me, through the chair, option A was the option that staff recommended due to the budget constraints at the time, and option A was the option that got designed, and that was an addition of the 450-seat theater, which is outlined in the feasibility study, as well as a minor renovation to the existing facility. My understanding in looking at the feasibility option B included a more extensive renovation of the existing facility, which we did not scope, we did not proceed to design with. So just a clarification there, unfortunately, the feasibility numbers, as Councillor Ferguson had mentioned, were wrong. There were a number of items left out of that preliminary estimate. One of them was site servicing. Another one was square footage of the overall facility, minimum for circulation space required around the theater. So those two omissions were one of the major cost escalators for from feasibility to detailed design and eventually submitting for permit. So that just a quick clarification there. But in terms of, to more closely answer the councillor's question regarding the impact of retendering, redesigning and retendering, my understanding is the 450 seat theater was never really an option from a program perspective. So perhaps I'm not the best person to speak to on the program perspective, but in terms of the mandate that we were handed, my understanding was that's not an option. So that might be an issue to discuss further. And being a 450 seat theater, there is no further reduction in square footage possible at this time. We would be looking to reduce the number of seats in order to save costs. And my understanding from a program perspective is that that's not on the table. So that was, that's sort of where we're sitting with that. That said, to reduce the size of the theater and the number of seats, we would be looking at a 1 to 2 year delay because we'd be looking at going through all of the design processes over again, as well as site plan and building permit. So that's essentially where we stand. One of the concerns from that perspective would be the risk of the existing federal funding, the $1.5 million. And speaking to the senior program advisor yesterday, I wanted to double check that I was correct in representing this information. And he confirmed that yes, I am correct, that there is a risk. The federal funding does say to be spent by March. And that would happen in terms of construction start, as well as the expenses already spent to date. However, if construction were not to start this year, that $1.5 million would then have to be pushed to a further budget year with federal funding. And at this current time, there's no federal funding available in the 2020-2021 year. However, there is funding available in the 2019-2020 year. So I wanted to confirm yesterday in my conversation that that was a risk before mentioning it here, and the senior policy advisor advised me that yes, that is a risk. So,
Thank you, Manager Ellis. Councillor?
So just to summarize that answer, so my understanding is that the option that's on the table that we're being asked to approve today is already the reduced option. And if I remember going back to the original report, the original ask was for a 50,000 square foot facility, which has been reduced down to 30,000 square foot. So the option that's on the table is already a reduced scope from what the original ask was. Is that more or less right?
through the chair, that's more or less correct. And there were a number of areas that were value engineered to date.
Thank you. So that's all my questions. I do have some concerns about the financing, in particular the gas tax portion of it being used to backstop the loss of the provincial funding. But overall, I mean, there's no argument that this is a very positive development for the city of Hamilton. So with that, I'll take the chair back, and then we have Councillor Nan.
Thanks, Councillor Danko.
Thank you, through the chair. First of all, just congratulations to the community for all of the work that you have all done in raising the funds to support this initiative. I think it's already been said around the table, but I just wanted to say it on the record that I think it's imperative that our communities that are able to fundraise do so, and this is an impressive demonstration of that. As a councillor and as a resident, I can't say enough about the importance of arts and cultural spaces that facilitate residents being able to not only develop themselves artistically, but find pathways towards employment, pathways out of poverty, pathways towards future education pursuits, and the role that arts plays to support especially young people who face different types of challenges and obstacles and systemic barriers in life. And so I don't know the Ancaster community well. I come up for the farmers market occasionally, but I don't know how the community itself has integrated diversity into this project. So whether it's through the ward councillor or if there's any staff, I'm curious about the community-based assessment of arts needs for our different populations and how this project might be able to support those residents who don't have access to these types of arts community spaces, and how we might be able to facilitate that. So for example, I'm a huge proponent of citywide services, right? How could residents from other parts of the city be welcome to use the services of this Future Arts Hub, and how is that being integrated into the programming model?
Is that a question for staff or for the ward council?
Whomever can answer it.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Nam, for the question. I can tell you to start with, you heard Bob say that there's some 400 children register or who have interest in the arts. Their parents and the children have interest in the arts, whether it's dancing or singing or film or painting, whatever. When this art center is up and running, they're going to double that to 800, and anybody in the city can register for those. And I'm going to suggest that maybe we should contact City Kids to have them use their busing to take children up to this training center if they register, to give them transportation up to our community. You also heard him say that only 30% of the people who actually perform are from Ancaster. Over 50% of the attendees who come to the shows are from the city of Hamilton, 30% from Ancaster, 20% from outside the city. So it's great for tourism too. So by all means, this will be opened up to any child in the city of Hamilton to register. And we've already seen, and it'll only increase with this beautiful new facility, the ability of people who reside outside of Ancaster to participate. If they like the performing arts, they can register and audition for shows. It's not restricted just to people of Ancaster, as evidenced by the number of people in the full community. But 70% are outside of Ancaster that already participate. So they will be made available to them. But I'm going to pick up from today that we probably should hook up with City Kids to be able to bring inner city children up to this training when you go from 400 to 800 students.
May I also suggest that, and this is for once the project is in operation, potentially collaborating with the COBRA, Coalition of Black and Racialized Artists, who are doing some incredible work in trying to figure out how to make sure that residents who are artists are, because of the deficit that we face in our city in terms of performance spaces, in terms of creative studios where people can generate their ideas and get it out to the community. I think it's very important that we integrate those partnerships, and I'd be happy to help facilitate that connection.
I'll make sure we get you connected with Colin Lapsley. Just wave, Colin, who would set this up for you.
Great. And on a financial point, I think it's unfortunate that the province didn't follow through with the funding. I'm glad to hear that there may be potentially new pots of funds for arts and culture from the province that we may be able to turn to for projects like this one and other ones that that folks are interested in other parts of the community. That said, it sounds like I heard, and I just wanted to clarify from Director McMullen, that there is the possibility for new funds in arts and culture from the province, potential limitations on a project having started to seek those funds, versus the tension of the federal funds, which want the project initiated in order to potentially increase.
They want the contract awarded before the funds will roll.
So I just wanted to make sure that I heard that correctly, that that is one of the funding tensions that we're facing in this project.
Director McMullen?
Yeah, so through the chair, that's typically one of the challenges with with funding programs is that they want you to have them shovel ready, and we can't have them shovel ready and do a lot of work when they then say that you can't have certain costs before certain dates then aren't eligible to be funded for the project. That's what happens in a lot of the programs, and so we haven't seen the details on some new program that might be announced related to community infrastructure. Because it hasn't been announced at the provincial level yet.
Okay. And were there any limits on the one-time federal gas tax dollars, or was it just to support what is already in the portfolio for the federal tax dollars, gas tax dollars?
Yeah, so through the chair, yeah, there was no limitations. It's like has to fit within the 17 categories of infrastructure that they have, which includes recreation infrastructure and cultural infrastructure, in addition to a number of other things, including transit, water, wastewater, solid waste, community energy systems, et cetera.
Excellent, thank you. I think just from a council perspective and a committee perspective, the one concern that I have is just how much we're going to be facing in the coming months of having to potentially stopgap or make really tough decisions about what we're able to fund as a municipality in the face of provincial funding cuts. We've seen it in other committees, we've seen it in terms of health, we've seen it in terms of so many other essential services that our residents rely on, and that's going to be a hard balance for all of us to be debating moving forward as we approach the 2020 budget. And I think it's just, it's another moment to say, it's unfortunate that other senior orders of government, particularly the province, have bailed on arts and culture. And it's wonderful that our community is ready to advocate, and hopefully we'll be able to land more money in our city for arts and culture. So with that said, that's the bulk of my questions, and looking forward to supporting the project.
We have no further speakers, so the recommendations are before you, A through F. This project has been tendered, so the main recommendation would be to execute the construction with the financing in the report.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to then, as I said at the start, I'd like to have not take the chair back, but I'd like to very proudly move the recommendations that are before us today. It's seconded by Councillor Collins. And briefly, I just want to thank immensely the members of the committee and their kind comments today towards this project and towards myself. I'm not used to that, but yeah, thank you again for the overwhelming support that you're showing today, and I look forward to inviting every one of you, in fact, all of council and senior staff, to the opening night when we get this facility built, probably in the next year and a half. So thank you very much. So it's been duly moved and seconded, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Whitehead on the speaker's list, second time.
Just a logistics issue, so I want the appropriate staff to sit down with the Councillor Ferguson and I to understand the mechanics of implementing the area rating on the areas that we represent. I don't know what that process, I've never gone through that process. I want to ensure that I do everything I can to not only support, but to educate the community that's impacted by this decision. Thank you.
No further speakers, so moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Collins, all in favor. Electronic vote. With that, I will pass the chair back.
Well, thank you. I'm so thrilled to get it unanimous. That is amazing, and because it is a very large project. But the community, thanks for coming out today. Thanks for showing your support, and to Bob and Colin again, thanks for what you've done. And so I'm going to turn the chair back over to you. You can have the podium if you like. I'm going to go out and just speak to some of the people here, and there's the roadmap.
Okay, I need. So 10-1 we have completed. We're going back to delegations on 8. So 8.2 is David Borsellino, respecting traffic data used to make modifications on Aberdeen Avenue. Is David in the gallery? Here. Mr. Borsellino, welcome.
Thank you.
Clerk, would you mind asking them just to step back to make sure the door is closed there? We'll just wait till the door is closed and then you can
Thank you very much.
get started. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Borsellino.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank council for listening to me this morning and Alicia for facilitating my being here, actually. When I was up listening to the previous talks, I started thinking that, oh boy, this is rather insignificant what I'm about to talk about. But then upon further reflection, I kind of feel that what I'm about to say and some of the concerns and frustrations that you're going to sense in my little presentation really reflect a lot of people's feelings who maybe don't have a voice in the city or just don't have the time to speak up. I happen to be retired, so I have that time. So in spirit, I think actually I do have a delegation. They just happen to be invisible. I'm just going to read so that I can keep to my 5 minutes. I notice the clock is ticking. Thank you. Good morning. My name is David Borsellino. I'm a resident of Ward 1. My concern is that major financial resources are being spent in my ward based on the personal agenda of our councillor and the Kirkendale Neighbourhood Association. There seems to be no attempt to seek consultation with a wider variety of constituents to reach a consensus that addresses the needs and concerns of all residents. This is a flawed process, which in my mind divides our community. When reviewing the recent council's vote concerning Aberdeen Avenue, I was shocked at the lack of objective traffic data on which the decision was based. Modifications around the area of complete streets and zero vision must be based on information objectively gathered over a period of time. If implemented, they should be monitored as to their effectiveness with the understanding that readjustments may need to be made. Unfortunately, in my ward, it seems that the perception of a few take precedence over the rights of many. Our neighborhood association represents approximately 1% of our 30,000 residents. In no way do they reflect, or more importantly, respect different perspectives. A recent poll indicated over 75% of citizens feel the changes to Aberdeen Avenue would be counterproductive. Yet their concerns were dismissed because of the feelings of a vocal minority. As we seek to develop more complete streets, it's imperative that all stakeholders be heard to ensure greater cooperation and success. Addressing the concerns of pedestrians need not mean you ignore the reasonable expectations of drivers. I am a pedestrian, a cyclist, and a driver. As a tax-paying citizen, I have a legitimate right to expect that all of my choices be respected. Commuters consist of hardworking residents who, for a variety of reasons, must use their vehicles to get to work. They deserve the same respect as everyone else. And may I just add at this point that commuters are not responsible for how our communities have been developed and how the suburbs have been developed. And in most cases, they have no choice but to use their vehicles. I taught for 30 years in a small school in Aldershot. I could not use public transit to get to school. After reviewing the data concerning incidents on Aberdeen Avenue, I do not understand why Edward Soldo, who referred to it as a high-risk street. From 2005 to 2018, over 13 years, there were 18 incidents involving pedestrians and cyclists. This averages to approximately 1.5 incidents a year. Surely this cannot be considered high risk. The majority of pedestrians' injuries occur at crosswalks. How does reducing the number of lanes have any impact on this issue? Sorry, I have to rush. May I also point out from someone who has lived in the neighborhood for 27 years, contrary to the narrative presented by our councillor,
Aberdeen Avenue is not a primary route used by students to get to the 3 elementary schools in the area. Students who live south of Aberdeen must cross Aberdeen safely at some point to proceed to school. There are also 5 such crosswalks: Queen, Kent, Lock, Cottage, and Dundurn. If the rules are followed, Aberdeen Avenue is currently very safe. No amount of modifications will ensure public safety unless all stakeholders commit to obeying laws. Any local concerns could be addressed through increased police enforcement. When discussing lane reductions with Mr. Ferguson, he indicated or claimed that commute time from Queen to Longwood Road would only increase by 1 minute. This after admitting the Queen Street Hill at 19,000 vehicles a day was overcapacity and little could be done about it. Further lane reductions will only exacerbate this problem, along with creating unnecessary congestion for EMS, fire trucks, and garbage collection. How can this be justified? I really look forward to turning left on Aberdeen during rush hour to enter my neighborhood.
That's the end of your 5 minutes. If
I'm sorry.
move to extend, Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Pauls.
Thank you very
All
much.
in favor?
I was worried about that. Thank you, I appreciate that. I put a lot of time and thought into this. I presume all those councillors who supported these changes took the time to drive down the Queen Street Hill during rush hour to better understand why, for commuters, this is a contentious issue. With regards to our own councillor, recently, enhancements were made to a T intersection that I live next to, at the corner of Kent and Glenfern. We now have 4 double white lines, 8 stop signs, and 8 tiger tails. In 27 years, I have witnessed no incidents at this intersection. Sightlines are excellent, and there are very few cars that access Glenfern from Amelia, which is basically a dead-end street. By comparison, the busier intersection at South Street and Dundurn remains untouched. When questioned, my councillor assured me that she had requested the changes and a traffic audit had been conducted. After investigating, I discovered the audit consisted of a one-time drive-by. Coincidentally, our councillor lives 1 block away, exclamation mark. These changes were unnecessary, costly, and contribute to a growing problem of sign pollution in our city. In conclusion, it is time that our city council stop taking for granted the goodwill and tax revenue generated from the silent majority in our city. I sincerely believe we are approaching a tipping point. We are hardworking Hamiltonians who love our city and are willing to make reasonable compromises to make it a better place for all. We belong to no marginalized group, are part of no code red study, and will never make the front page of The Spectator. But in reality, we are the backbone of Hamilton. And in my mind, increasingly it seems we have no real voice in civic decisions and the manner in which our tax dollars are spent. This culture needs to change. Number 1, councillors have a responsibility to listen to as many perspectives as possible. They need to actively consult with all affected parties. Even though each represents 1 ward, decisions made need to consider the impact on the city as a whole. Number 2, we need to acknowledge that given our current tax revenue problem, we have a spending problem. Too much hard-earned tax dollars are being spent on unnecessary projects. Our inner-city discretionary spending fund, originally allocated to fix our decaying infrastructure, is too often used, and I don't mean to offend anyone, to curry favor with those who make the most noise. As a resident, it is extremely frustrating to see the proliferation of speed bumps, $5,000, bump-out sticks, $100 each, pedestrian-initiated crosswalks, $100,000, tiger tails, $75, etc., as my taxes continue to rise. For too many residents, taxes have become the new mortgage. As a retiree, I pay over $600 a month on property taxes. My home has become a liability. The current level of property taxes and spending is clearly unsustainable. Yet I seldom hear any councillor talk about this or even acknowledge there is a crisis. Our city needs to deal with this issue in a serious way, and through thoughtful decision-making and prudent spending, begin fostering an attitude of respect for the concerns of all its citizens. And may I just add, after listening to the comments this morning, I was really pleased to see that there were some comments, of course, promoting the arts, which I agree with totally, but I like the fact that some of you were asking questions about the financial impact of some of these things. Thank you for your patience, and again, special thanks to Alicia for facilitating my appointment with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borsellino. Just remain there. You have questions from Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make clear to this committee and council that this would be the first time I've ever talked personally to David about this. So
We've never met.
this is not a setup. I want to make it clear because everything he said is everything I absolutely agree with. And it's so aligned with what some of the things I've been saying. I just want to make clear to this committee, I've never met David before. This is completely independent from an individual that came out on his own to speak the truth to power. So the question I have, and certainly the poll would suggest it, that consultation, we talk about engagement, and it seems like there's a vocal few echo chambers that are driving agendas at the expense of the broader community that are impacted by those decisions. Is that your view as well?
Certainly. And I do appreciate the fact that during this contentious issue with Aberdeen, which actually unfortunately didn't turn out to be that contentious from the vote, that you were one of the few councilmen who actually went to the public and tried to get a broader scope of what the opinions were. My councilor didn't do that. And it's really, really frustrating when that type of thing happens.
Well,
I appreciate that.
I can also assure you that I have received hundreds of calls from Ward 1 residents that are impacted along Aberdeen, on the south neighborhoods, that feel it's going to be very challenging for them at peak hours to get out of their neighborhoods as a result of these changes. And I often compare it to Stone Church on peak hours, and Aberdeen has a lot more traffic at peak hours in the morning and the evening than Stone Church does. So I can only imagine what may take place, but it's a process issue. So you talked about the fact that when you're talking and dealing with arterial roads, this really is about a transportation network. And when you're dealing with a transportation network, all those impacted should be involved and it shouldn't be localized in one area in regards to the consultation stakeholders. Would you agree with that through the chair?
Yes, I would.
Would it surprise you that that didn't happen?
Yes, very much so. May I just add to, sorry, Mr. Whitehead. I just want to make it very clear to all the other councillors listening that I'm not an avid just car driver and motorist. I'm seeking what I consider to be fairness across the board. And fairness for me is a really big issue. And I really think sometimes the way decisions are made currently with the current system, and I don't know who's at fault, that things are not fair and all voices are not heard. And that's really my driving concern behind this. It's not just specific to this particular decision, but just generally. Thank you.
So Aberdeen being an EDR route, and obviously I'm dealing with all kinds of backup and peak hour issues with 403 challenges and the hill challenges, and the last bastion, two exits are actually feed through my ward down to Queen Street Hill and West 5th as well, and Aberdeen is the relief. And yet there doesn't seem to be a sensitivity or recognition to the importance and the role that Aberdeen provides for the broader community. So the question I have through to you is, did you know that Aberdeen, as far as that data that, in regards to being unsafe, that Aberdeen, if you ranked it with the same data with the many other streets in the city of Hamilton, is probably around the 456 range of, meaning that there's over 300 plus roads are worse from a safety perspective than Aberdeen just from that data.
Yeah, I'm not surprised at that. That's why I included the 18 incidents over 13 years, because in my mind, that does not suggest that the road is high risk. And when I talked to David Ferguson at length, and I'd like to thank him for listening to me and having a very intelligent conversation about the issue for over an hour, actually, he suggested that we would never consider changing the speed limit in Aberdeen to 40 kilometers an hour because it's an arterial road, and yet they're willing to make it I presume the reason for that is that you need traffic flow, or you'd be willing to decrease the speed limit. And yet he's recommending that, or maybe he didn't recommend, that you change it from 2 lanes to 1 lane. So to me, those are diametrically opposed views. I don't really understand the logistics behind that.
Yeah, and I have some real concerns. I think the relief, and I want to thank my councillor colleagues, it is a pilot. It's going to be measured. And there might be an opportunity with the conversion of Queen Street, which was driven by a motion I put forward because of what happened on Herkimer, which is creating just more aggravation for people coming from the West Mountain and Ancaster and Center Mountain. So Queen Street becoming a two-way, it was hoped that it would take some of the pressure off not only Herkimer, but it would take some of the pressure off Aberdeen. So this is being tied, as I understand it, to that conversion. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware of that. I'm always leery about pilots because I've seen several changes made downtown, and I think under the guise of them being pilots, and it generally seems that once things are done, especially with traffic, because modifications have to be made, et cetera, is that they're usually not reversed unless there's a lot of data that suggests that it was really a poor decision. So I'm hopeful that it's a pilot, and I believe the term, but I'm not convinced that it really carries much weight. And in reference to the Queen Street conversion, again, going back to taxes, et cetera, it's really frustrating to know that the crosswalk at Queen Street costs $250,000, and it's now going to have to be, I think, is going to have to be ripped up when they convert to two-way. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's another point of frustration from someone who tries to familiarize themselves with what's going on in the city and keep up to date with how our money is being spent.
Fair enough. Majority of the accidents that, and even though they're low numbers, is ascertained were happening, majority of them were at intersections.
That's right.
Most of those intersections have, before they came back with the recommendation to go down to single lanes at peak hours, most of those accidents, issues have been addressed at those intersections. Would you agree with that? Over the last 4 years?
I have to say I'm not really up to snuff on
Saw the
how they've
changes,
been
though.
addressed, but my understanding is that most of the accidents involved pedestrians and cyclists with cars turning and not giving right away, or maybe vice versa. In some instances, I'm not sure the at fault and how that's explained to the public. I often try to find that, but that's kind of a gray area, it seems.
My last question is, sorry, council colleagues, but this is just an opportunity I can't resist. The speeding. I mean, even their own numbers, during peak hours, you're not getting too much speeding at peak hours because of just the sheer traffic volumes. Were you able to ascertain through your own inquiries that at peak hours, speeding is the primary issue along Aberdeen?
I don't think speeding, at peak hours speeding, it's nearly impossible for speeding to be the key issue because there's just too much volume on the road. What I took away from most of the changes were that there were voices in the community who felt unsafe walking along Aberdeen Avenue due to there being no buffers. And I often drive down Garth Street from Mohawk to Fennel. You can count the crosswalks and you can count the buffers, but there are very few. And I guarantee you that if that was ever proposed, that be changed to 1 lane, it would be very interesting.
Well, and I think that's a question I pose to staff, because and I'm going to pose this to my colleagues, because by exercising this on an emergency route that really provides relief to the West Mountain, Centre Mountain, Ancaster, what you're now doing is saying it's okay to bring Upper James, reduce it down by lanes, just for the same purposes. Gar Street, Mohawk, West 5th, there's so many arterial roads, and it would completely paralyze movement of goods, services in our community. So I'm not understanding what path we're going on, but I'm hoping we get the results from the pilot program.
And just to add, my understanding of arterial roads, and I'm not an expert in traffic, is that their sole function, or one of their main functions, is to actually keep traffic off of residential roads.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
Anyway, I appreciate your questions.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple more questioners.
Oh, great, thank you.
Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Borsellino, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming in. Councillor Whitehead has been consistent on this issue, to his credit. And my amendments, building on Councillor Whitehead's suggestions, that if we were going to go ahead, it'd be a 6-month trial, and the two-way conversion of Queen would coincide in October before the lane reductions on Aberdeen, which would allow the two-way conversion for mountain traffic to be able to have at least a couple of other left turns between Aberdeen and King Street. So with Charlton and Hunter. So I just want you to know, and I want to say about trials, I'll give you a living example. If you recall, a few years ago, we had a bus-only lane.
Yes, the dedicated bus lane, yes.
That was a trial.
Yes, it was.
In a year, the council of the day said, no, we need to remove this and reverse it, so please, nothing's done deal, carved in stone. For the public record, I just want to remind
No, I do realize that happened. That's a very rare case, but it did happen.
Thank you, Mr. Porcelino. So, without being judgmental, can I ask, why are you here now when you could have been here earlier before the decision?
Actually, one of the reasons I'm here now was because I wasn't even aware of this process.
I see. I'm not being judgmental.
No, fair question. No, I wasn't aware of this process. I came down last year to talk about my tax increases, and I also came down and made an offhand comment about the changes at Aberdeen, and I just didn't understand why they were being made. And actually, I was asked to. I went to. I guess public records to try to get some information on the studies that were done to support those changes, and I happened to meet Alicia, and she listened to me, and I'm presuming she thought I was fairly reasonable, so she said, you know, maybe you should there's an opportunity for you to speak. I said, so that's how I got here.
Okay. And also, I've often have talked about, Mr. Chairman, that I've always been open-minded to minority voices, that they're not left behind or lost. However, my colleagues around this table know one of my consistent phrases is the everyday citizen and taxpayer, at least speaking of my East Mountain community, that for me is still the overwhelming majority, must not be forgotten in any decision. So, building on that comment, you say that you feel, I'm paraphrasing, the majority of residents from your area, Ward 1. I have not seen any petition contrary to what the desire was, and being respectful of the current Ward 1 councillor as well. Can you, again, without being judgmental, give me some indication why this council could not have seen some counter with regards to the number of residents you're suggesting that aren't necessarily thrilled about this decision? Through you, Mr. Chairman, please. Mr.
Yeah, so a couple things on that point. When I was talking about citizens not having a voice, I'm not really talking specifically about our ward. I am particularly with that 1% statistic. Of course, making a petition involves becoming active, becoming a leader in the community, taking the time to do it. I'm going to tactfully say this. I just feel that this particular decision regarding Aberdeen is so egregious. I don't feel as a citizen I should have to become an activist to get my councillors given the correct data to make an intelligent decision about that particular street. So I guess I could have been the one to mount a campaign. Yes, but I just don't feel that as a citizen one should have to be politically activated in order to get things done that just seem to make common sense, I guess.
So, Mr. Borsellino, thank you for the sincerity of your answer. I would humbly suggest to you in the future, I would humbly suggest that your comment and answer was very theoretically understandable, but the political reality might very well have been different. So I just leave that thought with you. Thank you for coming in and offering your opinion. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. And last one is to Councillor Farr.
Yeah, through you, thank you for your delegation. And just from the budgetary standpoint, so we have over many, and you probably are aware of this, you seem learned on the topic. You've got price points on knockdown sticks and what bump outs cost and speed humps and so forth. So, but we're not just guided, and I do hear you. I'm Ward 2 downtown, and there are folks that are very actively engaged and seem to have a whole lot of time to participate in that capacity. And it's a balancing act because you're hearing a lot from a smaller group of people. And what I tend to do, I mean, we're on the street, we're hyper-local, we're municipal elected officials, and if there's something that affects an area specifically, I'll try to go to that area and speak to those residents, knowing that a large group of them are not going to go to the neighborhood meeting, or they don't want to go to the neighborhood meeting because historically they didn't agree with the neighborhood. There's all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, I feel going to my neighborhood meeting would be totally counterproductive.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's the problem.
Fair enough. And I'm getting your message, but it's not just that sort of engagement. We also look to, through you, Chair, and hopefully maybe you could understand this or comment on this, what's probably a few decades now of council mandates, things like Vision Zero that we unanimously approve, transportation master plans that we unanimously approve, cycling master plans that includes bike lanes that we unanimously approve. This is going on and on and on for many years through many terms of council and unanimously supported. And when we do this, do you understand, or can you understand, or just comment if you like? You took the time to delegate. Appreciate that from a budgetary standpoint, we do look at it. A big part of the argument is sustainable, complete streets, the things that we're doing are investments. So they're not just willy-nilly taxpayer throw the money at it and because a group of people want it. We do see through our many mandates, goals, Vision Zero, all these things, as building sustainable communities is actually a huge investment for cities, and it's proven over decades. Through you, Chair, your comments on that.
Well, I understand that, and I'm not adverse to any of those changes. If currently, from Queen Street to Dundurn Street, before the activated stoplight was put in at Cottage Street, which cost $100,000, there were 4 opportunities to cross Aberdeen Street safely from Queen to Dundurn. I walked by Cottage Street the other day to make sure my information was correct, because I sort of pride myself on having accurate information. So Cottage Street is 2 blocks from Locke and 2 blocks from the next crossover. And yet, for some reason, it was okay to spend $100,000 on that light, which is self-activated and is used sometimes. We currently have Locke Street being demolished. I happen to know one of the store owners on Locke Street whose taxes are through the roof. And, you know, maybe that $100,000 could have been used more wisely. I know that that's dedicated towards...
Red Eye Camera Reserve.
Right. I got that information. But perhaps that $100,000 could have been used to give those current business owners a tax break, because according to my counselor, she claims that she's very, very pro-business and we need the tax revenue, blah, blah, blah. As Seinfeld would say, yada, yada, yada. But, so I just question sometimes, I guess, how our funds are being spent. I think that was totally unnecessary to spend that money on the Cottage Street light. And when Dave Ferguson talked about it, he said, well, you know, we had a request from the counselor, we went down, it seemed fairly appropriate, so we did it. Well, in my mind, that's not good enough. Well, thank you.
A reminder to committee that this decision has been made and ratified. We're about halfway through this agenda for today, and we do have a Board of Health meeting at 1 o'clock. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you. And Councillor Farr did ask and raise, we have, and I have supported, I mean, I don't support the concept, the principle of trying to have as least amount of fatalities and injuries in your community is a laudable goal. The zero is a bit rich because you can't control the uncontrollable. So I've always had problems with that terminology because it's just not realistic, quite frankly. You can never design something that is so perfect that you can have 0 incidents, but it's laudable to try and reach that goal. But the issue is, so you can agree to those principles, but the issue is how and when you implement it. Should you be dealing with perception, or should you be dealing with the metrics? And I think far too often, like we did with Aberdeen, we're dealing with more perception than the actual reality in the metrics. Would you agree with that?
100%. And the problem in today's political climate, of course, is that perceptions widely vary for a number of reasons.
Thank you.
So I think data is the key to all of this. And I'm not impressed with the data that's being used. I'd like to thank everybody if there's...
no further speakers. Thank you for the delegation, Mr. Borsellino. Can I have a mover and a seconder to receive the delegation? Moved by Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Pearson. All in favor?
Thank you, and I hope I've given you some food for thought this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving on, item 8.3 is the proposed permanent closure and sale of a portion of a road allowance abutting 40 Maple Drive, Stony Creek in Ward 10. As required under the city's bylaw number 14-204, a public meeting is required. Notice of this public meeting was provided and was posted on the city's website, City of Hamilton's website. The notice advised that anyone whose lands are prejudicially affected may appear before the committee this morning. The clerk has advised that there are no individuals registered to speak on this matter. And I'm going to call for speakers. Are there any other members of the public who wish to come forward to speak to this matter? Seeing none, for a second time, are there any members of the public who wish to come forward to speak to this matter? Seeing none, and for a third time and final time, are there any members of the public who wish to come forward to speak to this matter, the permanent closure, a sale of portion of road allowance abutting 40 Maple Drive? Seeing none, may I have a mover and a seconder to close the public meeting? Did you want to speak on, after we close the meeting? Yeah. So moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Vanderbeek. All in favor? Carried. The public meeting is now closed. So on the report, Councillor Pearson.
Mr. Deputy Chairman, and I certainly with pleasure would like to move this report and recommendation. I want to thank staff. This is an ongoing process in Ward 10 at least, where we have been trying to acquire lands that abut the Bruce Trail pathway, and this is great news for users of the Bruce Trail and access along the escarpment to the opportunity to get this additional little piece, and I continue to work on other areas. A lot of these lands are privately owned, so it's an opportunity when residents say, you know, we'll participate, and there is some contribution, et cetera, but it's a wonderful bit of good news, and I certainly hope that everyone will support this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. So moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Vanderbeek. No further speakers. This will require an electronic vote. All in favor? Carries unanimously. Item 10.2, discussion items. To incorporate city lands into Acadia Drive bylaw PW 19063 in Ward 7, which was deferred from the July 10th, 2019 meeting. Is there any discussion on item 10.2? Seeing none, moved by Councillor Pauls, seconded by Councillor Jackson. All in favor, electronic vote. Carries. Item 10.3, standardization of Hamilton water equipment, parts, supplies, and services. I have a couple questions on this, so maybe I can pass the chair to Councillor Jackson, if you would. So through Councillor Jackson to, I believe, Andrew, could you just give us a quick background of the justification for this being a sole source approval?
So through you, Mr. Chairman, this is an annual report from Hamilton Water, much like many of the other divisions in Public Works. When we go through a construction process, we procure all of our equipment and construction services competitively. But once that equipment is installed, in order to maintain it over its lifetime, we require parts from the original equipment manufacturer. This report just gives us authorization under the procurement policy to do so.
So when the equipment was purchased originally, so those would be pumps, laboratory equipment, things like that, that was purchased through procurement in a competitive process, as you just said. This is authorization to buy parts and equipment to maintain the original equipment, correct?
Director?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that is correct. This is for maintenance of our existing infrastructure. Once a piece of equipment reaches its useful life and we are doing a more substantial capital upgrade, we will then retender that equipment and other works competitively again. This is just the routine maintenance on the equipment during its lifetime.
Thank you for that. So I'll take the chair back, Councillor Jackson, and we have Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, and the devil's in the details, so I hear the macro and the intent, but that's not exactly always what takes place. I've worked in the private sector and really quickly discovered that you can box yourself in regards to future procurement based on the fact they got an oversupply of standardized material for the type of pumps or whatever equipment that you may have in place at the time. So now you're boxed into a preference in regards to future procurement, which means you're not getting the true benefit of the lower cost on procurement. So help me understand how that is policed. So, and if that's the case, why are we dealing with this today? When we procured those original pumps or things that need to be maintained, why isn't the life cycle time frame for the part replacements not built into that procurement process?
So through you, Mr. Chairman, I have not seen a competitive document that requires a bidder to maintain its pump for its entire lifetime. We're talking about infrastructure that may last upwards of 20, 25 years. I'm not sure how we would go about procuring those services for long-term continued operation.
Yeah, I think we're the ones maintaining it. Is that correct, after the warranty period?
Through Mr. Chairman, that is correct. After warranty is over, we maintain.
Correct. So when we come back to report to council on the procurement, how come we're not dealing with once you make that decision, that we're now going to have a standardized parts for this particular machinery for the next, for the life cycle of that machinery versus ad hoc well after those procurement commitments already been made? How come we're not lining these things?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I'm struggling to understand the question. My apologies.
So you buy a car. The car has certain part requirements. You got a life cycle of, say, 10 years on that car. So when you put that procurement document out, you know that you're going to have life cycle costs for the parts for the car during the period of time that you're going to be utilizing it. So how come when we put that procurement out, we don't also build into what you got here now?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's not typically the way procurement is done for this type of infrastructure. I think comparing it to a car is maybe not the best example. We're talking about a variety of different equipment. When we do a construction project, there may be various types of equipment. Listing out the replacement of all individual components to a pump or a switchgear or a generator would make our procurement documents rather enormous.
So we do just-in-time orders on the parts, or we stockpile parts?
So through Mr. Chairman, it's a combination of both. For more routine parts that we use on a regular basis, we would keep a minimum stock level. For larger pieces of equipment, it is a just-in-time delivery.
The larger cost items?
The larger cost items, correct. We don't have the warehouse or really the need to store that equipment.
So the reason I'm asking these questions is we actually created employment, what was it called? Labor management participation teams. We had a lot of mechanics and so forth involved in saving money for Rio Algom. And this is what we found the weakness in these processes in respect to the parts. And we end up saving millions of dollars over time as a result of the contributions from the employees and identifying some of the challenges with these processes. So for example, the bearings for the scoop trams. They would do the special orders on and these are standardized parts, but they would spend $800 per bearing for the scoop trams. And it would be single sourced. Lo and behold, now we open up the labor management teams, we find out that Mazak Supply had the same bearing for $250. And so for years, we were spending $800 on a bearing that we could get for $250 from Mazak, and we were sole sourcing it. So I'm trying to understand how we ensure we protect ourselves from that was a reality in the private sector. So how do we protect ourselves from that?
So through you, Mr. Chairman, for certain types of equipment, there certainly is elements that can be, I don't want to be purchased at any location. Really, the items that are listed here are for the equipment-specific components that cannot be purchased elsewhere from a third party. These are only available from the original equipment manufacturer. If we choose not to purchase them there, we are required to remove that entire piece of equipment and replace it with something new. We certainly could do that and go through a competitive process that would increase our downtime as well as significantly increase our cost. If we were to replace a full pump for a $10,000 part, we could be replacing a $100,000 pump.
So the bearing example, because you got bearings and pumps, so you have more than one supplier of that same a bearing that could supply that pump. You're talking about sole sourcing that bearing from one group, are you not?
So through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm not specific on every single element within our appendix. I'd have to ask our team for that. But in general, there are components that we can purchase from a third-party manufacturer that can be used in a wide variety of equipment, but there are elements that cannot be.
I think procurement wants to answer that. Tina?
Through the chair, I believe the appendices that are attached to the report not only outline the parts and pieces, if you will, that need to be purchased from the original manufacturer, but also through the distributors. So some manufacturers deal through explicit distributors in a locale or geographic area, but some of them do not. So where there is not a dedicated distributor, we certainly go out and procure those parts and pieces. We only name the manufacturer as the OEM supplier, but there are a number of different suppliers in the market that we can procure from. So in that respect, there is an element of competitiveness. And I believe the appendices do differentiate between those that need to be procured not only from the stated manufacturer, but also the distributor, or from a manufacturer, and then it can be openly procured.
So if the manufacturer recommends that we prefer you to use, just like our car industry, they want rather you use GM parts versus post third-party parts. So of course, those post parts are cheaper. You go to Canadian Tire, you can get for half price than the General Motors parts. So in that scenario, how would that work? Are we locked into the manufactured preferred spec parts, or do we actually price it out?
So through the chair, I am under the understanding that if the OEM parts need to be purchased in order to maintain the warranty and to maintain the continuity of the equipment, we need to continue to purchase
The warranty period, yeah, no, that's fair. Okay, thank you.
You done, Terry? So, there's a recommendation before you. What's your wish? Moved by Councillor Farr, seconded by Councillor Nan. Further discussion on it? Seeing none, all in favor? Electronic? And that carries unanimously. Item 10.4 is HSR Transcab in-house bid. This is where they're seeking approval to go ahead and do an in-house bid in addition to the external. So, Councillor Jackson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Manager Vander Hyde, if you could please just be available for a minute. I'm really pleased to see this. Just to be crystal clear now, I've read the report, and on page 2 of the background, if approved today, Jason, this allows you with ATU to develop an in-house bid to service potentially the half a dozen or so businesses in the Red Hill Business Park that currently Hamilton Cab is doing. Mr. Chairman, through you to Jason, please.
Jason?
Through the chair, that is partially correct. It actually would also offer the opportunity to bid on the remainder of the Transcab services to Stony Creek and Glanbrook.
Thank you, Jason. And I'm really thrilled when we have opportunities to do in-house bids. And of course, as long as hopefully whatever the tender comes back is within the range, because obviously there's a taxpayer component, but where possible, especially with ATU and the wonderful public transit service that the 700-800 members provided at ATU and within our HSR are second to none. So Jason, in the interim period, then I'm reading something about Upper Ottawa, Route 22. What's the plan there? They would fill a gap during this tender process, or help me understand that a little better, Mr. Chairman, through you.
Jason?
Through the chair, for this fall, the Route 22 is actually being extended up into the Red Hill Business Park during peak periods. Those are our high demand periods where about 70% of our use is. So that'll be conventional service that'll be introduced for the first time into the Red Hill Business Park. And then the off periods, midday, late in the evening, would be serviced through Transcab.
Okay, and lastly, Jason, 77,000 annual trips into this area of my Red Hill Business Park and into the portion that Councillor Johnson represents. That sounds like a phenomenal, very positive number of users. I take it mostly workers, full part-time, that need public transit to get to their jobs. Is this a significant number, and has this even exceeded, if you will, HSR's expectations of the uptake? Mr. Chairman, through you, please.
Yeah, through the chair, like I said, 70% is happening in the peaks, and we would say that the numbers are significant in the peak periods where most workers are traveling to and from the major employers there. In the off-peak, it's still not substantial amount of numbers, and that's why we're going with a hybrid model and not putting the more costly conventional service into that area during those low demand periods.
So Jason, just to be crystal clear, the normal peak period you would define as what, the normal day shift type of hours, or does that extend possibly into the early evening? Mr. Chairman, through you to Manager Vanderhyde.
In this case, I believe the periods that we'll be running conventional service will be starting from 5:30 a.m. downtown until approximately 9:30 a.m. from the business area, and then again from 1:30 p.m. downtown until approximately 7:30, if my memory serves me correct, from the business park.
That's true. Jason, thanks for all the answers, Mr. Chairman. I'm strongly supportive of this. Happy to move it at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Go back to you. Councillor Whitehead.
Just a quick question. I'm very supportive of any public sector bid on almost any project. And of course, Maria Pearson and I and others were very involved with the wastewater when it was private sector, where they just grabbed all the low-hanging fruit and never took the risk. And worked on that procurement where it resulted that we got a lower bid from the in-house bidders. But I want to make sure there's a true independence. I think that if you don't have that, then you lose all credibility. So I'm not clear on these this particular project, what is built in to show a pure, blind, independent inside bid that isn't being perceived as having an inside track in any way.
Through the chair. Yes, we go to some extent to make sure that there are ethical walls that are set up between the in-house bid team and the evaluation team, if you will. So we make sure that the in-house bid team does have some representation from the city in this respect. But anytime there's information that's being discussed in the office, there needs to be some again, ethical walls. So if Jason is working on the the RFP evaluation team, and I was working on the in-house bid team, we would ensure that if this topic came up in discussion, I would leave. So we would make sure that everyone is informed of their duty and their responsibilities, and that information shall not be shared from these two groups.
So help me understand, is it the ATU that's doing the bidding? Or are we now getting, because there's a little different story if we're talking about, now we're into the ATU, or sorry, not the ATU, the ATS or whatever, or HSR that's actually doing the bidding. So I need to distinguish, is it the organization, or is it our transportation group that's making the bid?
Jason or Tina?
Through the chair, the ATU is the group that will submit the bid. They'll have assistance from city staff who are separate from the review process in making calculations around planning.
So what would Jason's role be in that process, through the chair?
Who do you want to answer that? Jason or?
Doesn't matter. I'm just trying to understand, because Jason is instrumental in the context of the conduit. So I'm trying to understand when you're talking about an ATU bid competing with private sector bids, I want to have absolute clarity on what that role is.
Through the chair, I actually won't have any representation on either side. My job will be to manage the staff that will be on either side of that equation, if you will. We do have an evaluation team that's identified that's completely separate to the one staff or two staff members that would assist ATU with planning calculations and the financial component of their bid.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Again, it's just about making sure that we're never being accused of, because I really want more in-house bids. I just, again, if you have one, it's one of those things, if you messed up once, then the credibility going forward on any in-house bids is out the window. So I want to make sure that we don't put ourselves in that compromised position. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Councillor Jackson, you want to move it, the report, move the staff report? Is there a seconder to that? Councillor Pearson, discussion on it? Seeing none, all in favor, electronic vote. That carries. Let's move on to motions then, 11.1. Councillor Danko, you want to place your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this motion is for the installation of speed cushions on Queensdale Avenue East in front of number 76 Queensdale Avenue, number 103 Queensdale Avenue, and Queensdale approximately 20 meters west of Bruce Park Drive. Funding for an upset limit of $16,800 to be funded from the Ward 8 Area Rating Capital Reserve Fund. And just briefly for committee, I believe that this recommendation was supported by traffic warrants. And if you'll recall, we recently installed a splash pad at Bruce Park, which has seen a pretty significant increase in usage of the park. And this is also abutting Queensdale Elementary School, which in recent years has seen a pretty significant enrollment increase. So this is really just funding the speed cushions, which are warranted from the Ward 8 Reserve.
So your seconder is?
Seconder is Councillor Pauls.
Councillor Pauls. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all in favor? Whoop. You've used up your time for the day.
After what I did for the Ancaster Arts and Community Center? Thanks, Mr. Reluctant Chairman. So I'm supportive right up front. I appreciate the ward councillor putting this forward for all the proper safety reasons that he's enunciated, especially in front of the wonderful redeveloped Bruce Park with the splash pad along Queensdale. So, but I need to make a point. Mr. Chairman, through to traffic staff, Director Soldo or Superintendent Ferguson, I'd like to know traffic department's position on this. Was this recommended and or supported by traffic? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Edward.
Thank you, through the chair, to the councillor. The site was the subject of a review where the speeds were actually undertaken. A study of the speeds was undertaken there. The average vehicle speed was about 41, the 85th percentile was 47. The posted speed limit is 40. So we do have speeders along this roadway, and the speed cushions would be an effective way of reducing the speed along the corridor.
That wasn't my question, Director Soldo. My question respectfully was, did staff recommend and or support this? Not that you had no possible objection to it if the ward councillor wanted to bring it forward, but did you support or recommend this? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Through the chair to the councillor, I'm not sure what the discussions were at a lower level in terms of staff, but I would support the installation of these similar to installations we put in other areas in the city. We have a 85th percentile here, which is higher than the posted speed limit, and this is a good measure to implement traffic calming along here.
Okay. That was not the information that I was given earlier, Mr. Chairman, so I will take that offline. Thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Whitehead.
I guess that's my concern, is there's inconsistency in what our understanding is and the responses we get. So I think we need an education and ensure that everything's aligned. When you're talking about 47 kilometers an hour and 85 percentile, I've never had a recommendation coming from traffic that we needed to make any changes or to do anything, and now I'm hearing that is a new threshold that we need to do something. So help me understand, what is the threshold now? Is it lowered? Is it 2 miles an hour over the speed limit? Is it 3 miles? Is it 1.5? Like, what is the threshold now?
Edward?
Through the chair to the council, there is no specific warrant related to the installation of speed humps. This is different than always stops or traffic signals, where there's a very defined warrant. We're talking about speed humps here, and you have to look at each situation. Here, looking at this location, there's a school in the area. There is a posted speed limit of 40, and with 85th percentile being 47, there is obviously a bit of an issue here with speeding. So if I was to be very specific to the question posed by the previous councillor, if I had an objection to the motion, I would have stated so in the motion itself. So these are reviewed at multiple levels, and when I saw the motion, I did not have an objection to it.
Yeah, I think the question is, did traffic recommend that the cushions need to go in this location, or basically you're just not objecting to it?
I believe that staff at a lower level did not originally recommend them, but I don't have an objection to it.
Thank you for the clarification. And again, I want to make sure that the language we use is getting really frustrating on traffic issues, and we need to align that conversation, because I never, ever in 15 years been sitting here being told that at 2, 3, 4, 5 kilometers an hour more, it's a justification to spend $16,000 on speed humps. Never, ever been told that there's even a justification for that. So now it's like a moving target. I'm trying to understand, because we need to have some standards. We can't have just an ad hoc across the city. We need to have some level of standard of what makes sense in regards to these expenditures over and above the drive and the cry from the community, you know, and there's a metrics, accident, speed, and so forth. So I always thought 40, with the numbers you're giving me, is actually a pretty good number, not a bad number, to justify any further expenditure. So now if we took that measurement, then we could pretty well put speed humps in every street in the city, every street. Every street, every section, every kilometer, whatever it is, using that standard. So I am a bit confused on how we're applying these standards. I like to see us standardize the approach. I was told, and this is the reason, before Councillor Jackson's question, the reason I came on stream to ask the question I was really going to ask was, I was told that we're going to do this comprehensively. I was told that, I'm meeting with Ed, that when we deal, and I'm setting up an actual community council to just look at road safety, to take a more comprehensive approach in regards to neighborhood approach to road safety, so it's not a one-off, one street, it's a more comprehensive approach to the traffic safety issues within neighborhoods. That was the impression I had from that conversation. So have we shifted now and we are dealing with one-offs? We got away from the comprehensive neighborhood approach?
Thank you. Through the chair to the councillor, staff is looking at these things in a comprehensive manner. What we're dealing with here are motions that are being brought forward by councillors. And we like to incorporate them into the larger neighborhood discussions. I do agree with you in terms of a standard and a practice. And as such, we're actually coming back to council with a revised traffic calming policy, which would help set those parameters as we move forward and help guide us in our decision-making as we make these decisions related to always stops and speed humps in the future.
And Ed, that's so refreshing, because all I've asked from day one is give us damn guidelines. Give us guidelines that is uniform. We can't have and have-nots in regards to the approach to taxpayers' dollars in regards to road safety. We have to have some standards. We have to understand what the metrics that make sense, because there's only so many tax dollars to go around. And we really haven't defined what that metrics is, what that number is, what those specifics are to rationalize and justify these types of expenditures. That's all I'm looking for. I'm not suggesting they're not needed, but man, we got to standardize something. That there's a clear understanding when you can dip in and do it, where it makes sense, and where it's just an overkill. So help us, please help us define those guidelines and those metrics on a go-forward basis. I certainly support what's here before us, but I want to see some standards. Thank you.
Councillor Pearson, first time.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I did take my name off because I thought I'd let Councillor Jackson follow up on his line of questioning. But I have to concur with the previous speaker, and I'm going to be very vocal and public out there. I don't support speed bumps in Ward 10, and I tell residents point blank, I believe that they're going to cause nothing more than road rage and problems going forward. I have them in the ward, don't get me wrong, but I do believe that we need some standardization because this really concerns me. I can tell you, and I tell residents, if I was to follow through with every single request in Ward 10 since I was elected, I would have stop signs and speed bumps on every single residential street in my ward. And that's not the community I want to see moving forward, and I don't believe residents do. I understand, and I'm supportive of the 40K coming in and looking forward. There is a neighborhood in my ward where it's going to be initiated, but now I'm really concerned. This is a 40K road, and now not only is it 40K, but now we're also putting speed bumps on it. So yeah, I believe we need to have a broader conversation around this table because I don't want to be pitted against other councillors and other and citizens coming forward as well. This councillor's doing this and this councillor's doing that. Why aren't you doing it? So I think it puts us all in a very compromised position. And it's a huge cost. When I was telling residents just on the weekend, I was at an event, how much a speed hump costs. I don't believe the general public understands this, and I think we need to get information out there, just as Mr. Borsellino raised today in his presentation, the cost of the pylons, the cost of the bump outs, the cost of speed bumps, the cost of tiger tails, everything. Because you know, at the end of the day, when I'm sitting at an event or I'm sitting talking to residents, they say to me, when are our taxes going to go down? We've got all this growth coming into Winona, east of Fruitland Road. I agree, it's a huge amount of development coming. And so our taxes should be going down. Well, no, they don't, because every time we keep getting more requests, there's more costs. And this is no slight on staff, because staff are trying to do the very best they can. But we have to get a handle on it around this table, because at budget time, we know for sure next year, we're going to have a major, major problem. And I just, for one, want to have some continuity of what's happening throughout our whole community, Mr. Deputy or Mr. Chairman. So at the end of the day, allow Councillor Jackson. I appreciate it. I'm sure he's going to have further comments. I don't mean any disrespect to the ward councillor, because believe me, if I came forward and said, you know, this is what I need in my ward, I certainly would like to have the support of it. But I think we need to have a handle and understanding of where do we want to see this happen. Because believe me, right now, if we have 40-kilometer signs installed in a whole residential neighborhood in my ward, and all of a sudden I get requests for speed bumps, I mean, I don't think I can pull my hair out anymore. I'm just so frustrated. So I'm going to leave it at that, but I would hope that maybe in the future we have some sort of narrative around this table of where we think our safety should be going in the city. Because it's not just Hamilton, Mr. Chairman. I was up in the community of Lanark on vacation, and you know, they've got tiger tails, no speed bumps because it's all pretty well rural. But they've got tiger tails, they've got the stop signs, and I sit back, I was just looking at some pictures this morning going, wow, there's a tiger tail there. You know, and it's interesting. It's not just Hamilton and area. It's all over. And how do we change the mentality of the citizens in traffic? It scares me that we're going to put the 40K, and obviously it's not working. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Pauls.
I really appreciate Councillor Pearson talking, because yesterday I had a meeting at McQuestion Park, and we had about 50 people sitting there, and I had staff. I had wonderful staff. And when the traffic came, it was all about wanting stop signs. It was all about having speed bumps. And I'll tell you, education is everything. When the staff, his name is George, wonderful, talked why we shouldn't have them. Because if you want it on your street, the next one will have it on the other street, then will cause more problems. I'll tell you, at the end of the meeting, everybody clapped. Everybody was so impressed with the city of Hamilton because they had an explanation. Now, they were still concerned about, you know, some traffic. So it is education, telling them. And I think once we have the staff telling them how the city is dealing with it, we could have all the same message. And when we have all the same message, then people will understand. So I will support Councillor Danko because that's his ward, and he knows a little bit more about it. But in my ward, I've had, they wanted stop signs, and we explained why stop signs are not good, you know? So in my ward, that's my message. And I hope we could have a uniform information where everyone says the same thing. So, okay? So I thank you, Councillor Pearson, because exactly I believe that's the truth. So thank you.
Okay, Councilor Danko, just take a chair for 1 second, and I've remained quiet on these things coming in regularly. I can tell you right now, we have 0 speed bumps or speed cushions in Ancaster, and it'll never be as long as I'm in office. I think that they're terrible, that they punish 100% of the drivers when only 2% are speeding. And they're hardening your suspension. I won't shop at Sobeys because they have these speed humps which twist your suspension terrible when you go over them on the car. If you live near one, you're going to have all the screeching brakes and all the acceleration and the pollution that comes from those. And most people don't speed. So I will never be coming forward to this committee to ask for speed humps to be installed anywhere in my community. And like Councillor Pearson, I get asked all the time. And when I explained that I'd rather give out police tickets and hit the guys that are speeding rather than 100% of the drivers, they like Councillor Paul's constituents say, yeah, that makes sense. It's just the mindset of speed humps, put a speed bump in. They don't realize that everybody else is going to want one too, and they're going to be all over the city, and it's going to be a mess. They're tough on snow plows too, and I've seen some of the removal ones where the snow plow actually pulls out chunks of them as they catch them. So I'm not a fan of them at all. And so I'll take a chair back and go to Councillor Vanderbeek at first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any questions for staff. I just want to make a comment. I have no speed bumps in Dundas other than on the driveway of the driving park where they have humps. There isn't a street in Dundas with a speed bump. And a long time ago, it was my idea and my motion for the town of Dundas that we groove Cross Street at Park because we can't put a four-way stop there. It's a hill. And so they grooved it, and they couldn't hold a wedding or a funeral in the church, and they couldn't keep the china in the china cabinets or the pictures straight on the wall in the house across the street from the church. So we filled it in. I learned my lesson. The truth is, we get asked for speed bumps every week of the year, and every street in town could have a speed bump. But the person who asked for it, it doesn't belong in front of their house. It really belongs up here. And that's because nobody wants to listen to ba-bump, 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 ba-bump every time somebody goes over it. And goodness help us if a lawn maintenance truck with a trailer goes over it, then you got crash, crash on the back end. And there may be communities who really want it, and I truly believe that councillors know their own community. And so I'm going to support this because I believe that Councillor Danko knows his community. And if they want it, and he's going to use his area rating money to put it in, then that's fine. I'll support the councillor because I believe the councillors know what they're doing in their own community. But I don't know if I want a standard. And I'll tell you why. Because his community is different than my community. And someone else's community is different than my community. And for me, as long as that standard means that I don't have to put it in if it measures that standard, but that staff will support it if my community wants it and it measures that standard, then I'm okay. And I agree with Councillor Pearson that we need a discussion around the table about that. And so, or report from staff we can discuss. But for me, speed bumps are problematic. And I don't think they do the job they're supposed to. In some cases, maybe they do. And I'm not going to argue with Councillor Danko because he feels that they will in this case. But I do want to be clear that in my ward, I don't support speed bumps. And I wouldn't be coming to this committee to ask for them. So if we're going to do that minimum standard and we're going to have the discussion, I'm happy to contribute to it. But speed bumps to me are a no-go. Thank you.
Okay, we'll start on second-time speakers, and we have Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Whitehead obviously would be a much better district attorney in court than myself. So, Mr. Chairman, through you to Director Soldo, what I tried to ask, but obviously Councillor White asked it in a much more direct, succinct way, was if you would repeat that your staff below you did not recommend the speed humps for Queensdale, but that at your level and overall, traffic had no objection if the ward councillor wanted to move forward with them. Mr. Chairman, through you, please.
Through the chair of the councillor, I apologize, I didn't understand your initial question, but that is correct. The lower level staff did not recommend it, but I don't have an objection to the installation of the speed hump.
Thank you, Director Soldo. So I'll start again, Mr. Chairman. I am supportive of 11.1. The ward councillor knows best. I never got to my point, which was a couple of months ago, the same councillor had serious objections to a single bus stop in my ward, and I had a petition of 100 names for it. And I'm just trying to be respectful. When it's citywide issues like a stadium, LRT, airport development, waterfront, absolutely. But when it comes to localized issues, I just try to be so respectful of how the ward councillor feels, what his community needs, and I was just trying to make that connection that a couple of months ago, he had serious objections because staff professionally did not recommend a bus stop, but I thanked him at the end of the day. He did come around to support it. I'll be supporting this here today because he feels it's important for his residents along Queensdale and the park users. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Danko. Second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So wasn't expecting this discussion to go in an overall debate over the effectiveness of speed cushions, but just briefly for the benefit of committee, I believe there is also a high AADT on that roadway of Queensdale, and this is a school zone which will be decreased in speed from 40 kilometers an hour to 30 kilometers an hour in alignment with our neighborhood speed reduction strategy. Which is in the future. So we're looking ahead here. And are speed cushions my first choice? No. They're one of the few traffic safety measures that are actually proven to have an effect on speed. Traffic and speeding are probably the top two most consistent concerns that I get as the Ward 8 councillor. My first choice would be community safety zones with photo radar and enforcement, but until we have that tool available to us, this is the next best option, in my opinion, in these locations. So I appreciate the support for committee. And like I said, this is supported by the community and will be very much appreciated. Thank you.
And you want to go ahead with all three then, do you, on Queensdale? Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, and I indicate I'm going to support it, but what councillors need to recognize is when they exercise that kind of discretion, it does create pressure on other councillors, and when you create even a lower and lower, you keep lowering the threshold in regards to the justification without staff actually determining a minimum standard, then we are really opening up a Pandora's box across the city. So I think it is important. Doesn't mean you have to opt in, but we need to create a minimum standard. And to suggest that less than 2% are speeding, and we need speed humps going in over 7 kilometers an hour over the 40 kilometer speed limit is the new standard, then now we're getting into a danger zone, because I don't think from any standard people would suggest that that is a justifiable reason for it. And I think there's another reason that has been identified by the good councillor. But we need to have, so that the broader community knows what the minimum standards are, because now the minimum standards are all over the place. The speed humps and the effectiveness, well, during the election on Cranbrook, we put a couple in. And when I was knocking on doors, 4 people gathered in front of one person's home and said, "Terry, why don't you stay here and observe how effective the speed humps are?" So I stayed there, and sure enough, a car came over around the corner, hits the speed hump, slows down. The minute they got off that speed hump, they left rubber. and sped up to make up for lost time from that temporary slowdown of the speed hump. And they said, Terry, then further up where the other speed hump, same observation. And so they said, yeah, it is working. There's no question. But the question is, comprehensively, is it working? Because it's working for that 20-meter or 10-meter stretch. But they make up through frustration the time lost as a result of the slowdown on the speed hump. I don't know what traffic has done in regards to the observation of the experiences that my residents are sharing on the speed humps. But I'd be interested to know if, in fact, they are working in the manner we thought, or if, in fact, it's very a minute area that's actually, it slows down just where the speed hump is, and you're really effectively not slowing what I call the acute drivers. So I look forward to that study. We should be going and looking at speed humps where they're currently located and determine whether overall speed on the street has slowed down or is only slowed down in that particular small section of the road. Thank you.
Okay, so they have no more speakers left. The motion's been duly moved and seconded. All in favor? Okay, we'll move on now to the next item, which is installation of 2 ornamental bollards on northeast corner of Main Street and John Street South. Councillor Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Marula. Whereas the number of collisions have occurred resulting in vehicles coming to rest on the sidewalk, striking the building or on the northeast corner of Main East and John. Whereas there are concerns for pedestrian safety at this busy commercial intersection. Therefore, be it resolved that staff be directed to install 2 ornamental bollards on the northeast corner of Main and John, and be funded from the Area Rating Fund Reserve. It's $6,000, and that the mayor and the city clerk be authorized and directed to execute any required agreements, and so on and so forth. Just very quickly, this is a very busy place. The hoarding that you see up there now, there's a big redevelopment happening at this particular corner. It's been struck 3 times, to my understanding, in the last 3 or 4 months. So we're seeing an increase in cars for some reason jumping up onto the sidewalk there, and it's very, very concerning, as you can imagine. We're talking about Main Street and John Street. Fortunately, they've happened off peak hours at this point. And I just wanted to say very quickly, Mr. Chair, the ornamental bollards are matching with the downtown BIAs. They're very consistent in aesthetics with what we see in places like Gore Park and other intersections where we've had similar concerns. So these are the solid ones. These aren't those knockdown sticks that sometimes we see knocked down and they never pop back up. So again, seconded by Councilor Marula. Thank you.
Okay, there's no other questions, so all in favor? That carries 11-0, so 11.3, installation of speed cushions. Councillor Mula, please introduce your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is related to the speed cushion on Wexford Avenue South. And since I've been so enlightened by what Councillor Whitehead said, I might actually install 2 of them to prevent that anecdotal problem. But having said that, I'll talk to staff before I do that. So, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Collins.
Okay, I have no other speakers. Can I have the order, please? All in favor? Terry, you going to vote? Okay, let's move on to 11.4. Back to you, Jason, for Ward 4 Area Rating Capital Reserve Community Building Capital Partnership Projects.
Ward 2 Area Rating Capital Reserve Community Building Capital Partnership Project motion, and there are 3 of them. One is for 19.2. These are power conduits. We've been trying and working hard for years now with Electra and our other friends Merchants along James Street North. It will serve a dual purpose, probably more as the years unfold. A holiday seasonal public art lighting and Supercrawl Productions. When you're at Supercrawl and you hear those generators, particularly behind the large staging areas, you won't anymore, should we get approval and ratification Friday. 5,500 for string lighting on Restaurant Row. Again, for a few years now, we've been having the conversations. Now, from an engineering standpoint, we have realized a way forward, a fairly inexpensive way to make a 2-block stretch of what a lot of us now affectionately, not all of us, but affectionately call Restaurant Row on King William. I see you there all the time, Mr. Chair, so I know you like it there, and now you will be lit up thanks to a very attractive aesthetic that we see in a lot of entertainment districts across the world, actually. So it'll be our first in Hamilton. And then finally, $50K in replacing, this is Shamrock Park North infrastructure improvements that include a basketball pad and pathways, and thank you to park staff for assisting with that, and I'm sure the good folks of Corktown will be very happy. And I once again have a seconder in Councillor Marula.
Okay, moved by yourself, seconded by Councillor Moonham. By the way, Councillor, I was lit up earlier this morning with a big resolution at the start. But so I see no speakers. Well, Councillor Whitehead.
Mr. Chair, I got a number of serious questions of the good councillor in respect to the utilization of his area rating, but I'm just not going to ask them now. Thank you.
See no more speakers. All in favor of the motion? Okay, let's move on to 11.5. Councillor Van de Beek, please introduce your motion respecting Victoria Park pedestrian lighting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a motion that I'm bringing on behalf of the councillor in Ward 1. It is to add some pedestrian lighting to Victoria Park. Most of Victoria Park is already, the pathway is already lit. The southern area is not currently lit. And so she is looking to, it says here, whereas the $80,000 project of funding was previously approved for Victoria Park pedestrian lighting is not adequate to meet the $112,000 estimated costs for archaeological work. It increased the lighting scope and the contingency. So, therefore, be it resolved that an additional $32,000 of funding be allocated from the Ward 1 Area Rating Reserve Fund to that project to implement new pedestrian lighting along the southern pathways of Victoria Park, and that the mayor and city clerk be authorized and directed to execute any required agreements and ancillary documents to allocate that $32,000 from the Ward 1 Area Rating Reserve to the project to implement the new pedestrian pathway lighting along the southern pathways of Victoria Park. It's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Whitehead.
And Councillor Whitehead wants to speak.
I just want to note that I am seconding this Ward 1 initiative. Thank you.
Should we note that? I'm seconding. I got that. Okay, all in favor of the motion? Okay, that finishes the motions. Is there any notices of motion? Seeing none, general information. Can I please have a mover or a seconder to approve the amendments to the outstanding business list? Moved by Van der Beek, seconded by Pearson. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That carries. Let's move on to private and confidential. 14.1, appointment of Keep Hamilton Clean and Green. Members of the committee, do you wish to move into closed session to discuss 14.1, an appointment to Keep the Hamilton Clean and Green Committee? Anybody wish? Councillor Van der Beek.
Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't catch your attention fast enough, but under other business and general information, I did want to...
I'll come back to you on that. Let's just finish this off. And
oh, okay.
Because I don't think we'll be going into camera, quite frankly, and I'll go to any comments. Does anyone want to move in on the Clean and Green Hamilton? If not, Councillor Pauls. May I have a motion that recommends be approved and released publicly following the approval by council?
Moved by myself.
Just hit your button there.
Moved by myself, second by Councillor Sam Morella, appointment to Keep Hamilton Clean and Green Committee for the 2018-2022 term. that the recommendation be approved and released publicly following approval by council.
Seconder to that?
Amarella?
Samrella. Okay. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor? That carries. Is there any other business? Councillor Vanderbeek. You disappeared.
No, I'm here. Thank you.
You're here. I can't see if.
Councillor Paulus, you might want to turn your mic off. Oh, there you go. Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I want to bring to committee's attention an email that I sent to each of you today with pictures of an incident that happened in the Dundas Driving Park, which is a citywide park, last night. We've had some real problems in Dundas recently with vandalism and graffiti, and it's not usual. I mean, we have some graffiti here and there. That's usual. But these have been significant issues. So a few weeks ago, someone or someone's lit the play structure in Veterans Park on fire and destroyed it at 5 a.m. in the morning. A couple of nights ago, they burned a garbage can in, I believe, in a bus stop, a new one, and lit fires along a path late at night or early morning. And last night, the driving park was covered in graffiti, terrible graffiti. Staff have called in the contractors to clean up the graffiti. The police have been involved all along. They are aware of last night's incident, and they are investigating and working on this, and they alone can speak to what's happening there if they can. But I'm certainly not. I'm not insinuating that they're not doing the job, because they've been in touch with us and they are doing their job, but they're having difficulty. And so I am hoping that, I don't really know what I'm asking for. I'm asking for some support to perhaps put some cameras in the park, even on a temporary basis, I don't know, I'm looking for some feedback. Some of you have parks, and I know you all have parks. I do know that there are some cameras in some parks, and I do know that there are areas of the city where this may be a usual thing. I don't know, but it is not usual in my ward. And it is extremely upsetting to my constituents and to me. And I am quite frustrated by the fact that we haven't been able to do something to curtail what's going on in Dundas at this moment. So I just want to put it out there and hope that perhaps staff might be able to speak to it a bit, and that some of my colleagues might have some advice, and that perhaps out of that something can come out that will assure my constituents that we're trying to help. So.
You want to ask Kara?
I just see Kara and Craig having a conversation over there, so I didn't want to interrupt.
Kara, do you have anything to add to that, or Craig?
Through the chair, what I would recommend we do is we speak to our security specialist and within the city, and we can talk about what the different options are for this area, and we can talk to the police as well and see what they recommend.
So that's the recommendation, is to send it off to our security specialist to report back. Now, Kara, would this come back to Public Works, or maybe Rome can handle this? Did it come back to Public Works or GIC or Council?
Through the chair, I received the pictures this morning. I did share with our corporate security office, and the corporate security office reports through into my office. We're looking at this more comprehensively. Graffiti vandalism is a chronic issue across the city, especially on city-owned properties. So we're looking at this and bringing back a comprehensive report with recommendations as part of the budget process. I'm not sure if we're looking at something to do something immediate now, but there are various parks, various facilities throughout the city that are faced with the same type of problem. And we're going to look at this more holistically and come back on what those budget impacts will be and provide recommendations through the budget process.
Okay, it is a bigger problem. I know Ancaster had about 40 cars damaged and a church damaged. I know Councillor Pearson's had it recently, and then it's generally one person, and they eventually get their man, and I suspect the same will happen here, but so I don't know whether you want to put a formal motion to ask staff to report back on it.
I think I'd like to do that at the appropriate time. I see there are a couple of other speakers. So if you would come back to me, I think just a simple motion that basically asks staff to report back on the
And you may want to raise it again at council to have the head of council, who is also chair of the board, speak to the police about it and get a comment.
Well, this week it will be me in the chair.
I'm sorry?
This week it will be me in the chair.
That's even better. Okay, so I'll let you wait for the motion, and you can write something out, and I'll go on to the other speakers.
Thank you.
So regarding this issue, Councillor Collins, or something else?
It's related.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think we're all, I mean, it's that time of year, and we all receive complaints about graffiti, and I think the pictures that Councillor Vanderbeek shared are fairly shocking and probably are at the extreme end of what we all encounter in many of our parks and open spaces. And I've had a similar problem, back to the security issue. I have a community garden in Riverdale, and at different hours of the day, we have people visiting the garden, taking their soil, taking their mulch from their mulch piles. People are just pulling up in their cars with blue boxes and other containers and taking things away. And they've experienced some vandalism as well, and some theft. All of their tools were stolen, and so this is becoming, it's certainly not just a Dundas issue, but again, I think we've all experienced these types of activities, and I'm wondering, what avenues there are for us to pursue as it relates to monitoring and security. And, Councillor Vanderbeek has mentioned cameras, and I know that some of my colleagues, Councillor Marula, spearheaded that a couple of years ago in certain areas of the city where we had consistent incidents at the same location. And so I'm just wondering whether staff can provide some options and alternatives for us to make some investments in order to ensure that if someone's visiting a park or if someone's participating in a community garden or any of the other amenities and facilities that we have, that it continues to be a safe space for everyone, and it's and it limits the ability for people to do what they've done in the Dundas Driving Park or in my circumstances at the Riverdale Community Garden, and we can all share locations. So I'm anxious to know what that list involves. The first reaction for many, and it's come from the group, is, can we put signage up? Can we put cameras up? And I'm just not certain what my options are as it relates to making investments to try to curb, we'll never eliminate it, but to try to curb the activities that occur from time to time in some of these hot spots. So that's the issue that I wanted to raise. I'm certainly sympathetic towards what Councillor Vanderbeek's been through, very extreme in terms of what she's shown us in the pictures, and I'm willing to support whatever initiatives it takes to get them back on track. But I'm experiencing the same in a different way, in different circumstances at a different location, and hope that staff can provide some assistance as well.
Okay, sounds like there's a motion coming in, Councillor Collins. You may want to amend it or second it or do what you have to do to come from our facilities director on this matter. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I maybe add some humorous to this, but at the same time, it's serious. I mean, I often think about the paint guns spitting back with identifiable medical ink. That when the police are trying to identify the vandalism, they're marked now. And now I'm finding out that you can actually get stuff that lights with black light. So you can have just like a sprinkler system with this little I don't know, chemical or paint, but it's an invisible paint that lights up with a black light. So it makes it easier for the police to potentially track people that are culprits of vandalism. Cameras are expensive, so it's just basically look at all the options, what tools are being used in various locations throughout North America. I'm sure there's some innovative ones, but I think we need to start capturing more of these culprits that are doing it. And it's complete destruction. It's unfortunate that they're probably coming from broken homes or poor realities. That's another issue in itself. But it's costing taxpayers money, and we need to nip it in the bud. So I look forward to every option coming forward.
Mr. Pearson.
Thank you, and I certainly agree. I'm supportive of Councillor Vanderbeek being involved, and I appreciate what Rom D'Angelo mentioned. I look forward to a report coming forward. And again, I'm going to touch on the same as I had with the speed humps. I think we need to get a handle on the costing so far. I mean, we get this at budget time, and we need to educate the public. I can't say it any louder, any clearer. We are in a huge bind coming the 2020 budget. And the general public have to understand it's these silly little costs, that add up. And they're all paying for this, and they don't understand it. So they see it as graffiti, they see it as a little bit of scribble, and they walk away, but they don't realize how much it's costing the municipality to go in and to repair, sometimes dismantle because it's so completely damaged that they have to take the boards off and replace them because they just can't remove it anymore. And I know Rom's nodding his head. We know this is going on. And I don't even know if we're over $1 million now in graffiti costs, but I'm sure we are. It's no different than illegal dumping that we've had to deal with. The other thing is I do remember Councillor Farr dealt with a major issue several years ago in Ward 2. And I'm just going to leave it with staff because I'm not going to ask for an answer today. But can we also have a follow-up with the police and possibly the police making a presentation? Because I'm wondering if they still have our rewards program that, identifying if somebody knows what's going on and then the people are captured. And I think that's why I'm tying into Councillor Farr, because if I remember, that may have been what happened back a few years ago. And some of you may remember with a huge graffiti that was being done. I don't want to say how it was being done because I don't want to encourage it again. But it was being done on vacant buildings in Ward 2. So I'm just going to put those suggestions and points out to Rom, and hopefully we have more comprehensive discussions coming forward, that information. Thank you.
And Councillor Pearson, you may want to get Councillor Vanderbeek to request the police do appear before the committee when that report comes back so that we can hear from them. Okay, Councillor Marula.
Just quickly, a couple of things, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, with respect to the camera issue, that is, presently staff is putting together a follow-up report with respect to the pilot project, because it was a pilot project, which Councillor Jackson paid for Fay Park out of his area rating budget. Secondly, part of that other initiative, that initiative itself was to focus in on proactive enforcement, which is also forthcoming. There's a budgetary commitment that's attached to it, but I can't think of another time in our history that's more relevant and important than it is today to be proactive on this issue rather than reactive, and also incorporate the compassionate aspect of those residents that continually get impacted, are victims of crime. It is a crime, and then to be expected within a certain time frame through the enforcement of the bylaw to clean the graffiti. So we also, in that initiative, brought forward a compassionate aspect to it all. So it's a very comprehensive initiative. The pilot project is coming to an end, and staff is recommending it be permanent. So I look forward to support accordingly when that time comes forward. But one thing I do also want to say today, and I want just to inform staff if they can follow up, based on the tagging of this incident in Dundas, we have the exact same type of signatures going up the Kenilworth stairs on a rail line, which is kind of interesting. So it'd be the same group of people, so if I can just have staff follow up accordingly. I saw that this morning and I forgot to email it in. So I appreciate your time. And also, I noticed in an email, Councillor Partridge's father passed away. So we just received an email accordingly. So my condolences to her and her family.
Councillor Partridge, who passed away? His father? That was quick. Okay. Councillor Vanderbeek, do you want to? Oh, well, you've had your turn.
Mr. Chairman, just briefly, when Councillor Marula puts forward great ideas, I usually quickly try to jump on them and get them implemented even before he can. Anyways, so on the cameras, I can tell you in staff's bylaws data shows this, that I had regular tagging of about a dozen backyards that abutted Fay Park in the Huntington neighborhood. I had about 6 homeowners abutting Lisgar Park in the Lisgar neighborhood that regularly were tagged, graffitied, and of course the city policy then was, doesn't matter who did it, doesn't matter that it came via a public space, the homeowner had to clean it up. We gave them 19 days or else a $10,000 fine. Councilor Marula's very cogent point about re-victimizing the original victim, who was a victim through no fault of their own, was absolutely appalling. Anyways, we put in some compassionate components to that. My point being, to Councillor Vanderbeek, the CCTV cameras that I've put in the 2 parks, bylaw data has shown that my homeowners have not had a graffiti incident since. And of course, that's gone along with the signage that has been around the perimeter of the parks as a deterrent as well. I offer that as thought and suggestions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Always profound, Councillor Jackson. So, Councillor Vanderbeek, do you want to put your notice of motion? Then we'll waive the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, please. I need to put a notice of motion forward with regard to the motion that I'm going to bring forward. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Whitehead.
All in favor of waiving the rules? I think we have to do electronic. Should we yell at us? Okay, that carries. So, Councillor Vanderbeek, put your motion.
Thank you. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Chad Collins that staff be directed to explore options including police involvement and possible camera installations to address the increase in vandalism and theft throughout the city and the feasibility of the resolution, and report back to Public Works.
So are you asking police to appear in delegation or just comment?
I've asked staff to explore the options, including the police and camera installations.
So it's duly moved, and your seconder is Councillor Collins, so raise their hand up. All in favor, then? Madam Clerk, do you know why Councillor Whitehead's name is not coming up? There you are. Don't take it personally. That carries unanimously. Is there any other new business? Motion to adjourn by Councillor Farr, seconded by Councillor Pearson. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you.